right. Hello and welcome to Cleveland Skateboarding Storytellers. I am your host, Christian Svitak. Have a little intro here I wanted to read to you all. After all the decades of being in the professional skateboarding world in California, I learned a lot about many other pros' stories and many other skateboarding scenes from all around the world. But the scene that I really always cared about and have been interested in the most was the one that I came from. My first favorite skaters weren't in the magazines or the videos. They were my friends, and they were the skaters of the greater Cleveland area. And I am here now to try my best to get their stories, our stories, told, shared, documented, and in the history books. And with that being said, please welcome my next guest, Garth how do you say it? McCallum.
Yeah.
Garth McCallum. All right. I almost messed that up. Well,
We're
welcome,
lifelong
Garth.
friends. Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. To bring everyone up to speed of maybe who Garth is and how I got in contact with you, I think it goes back maybe a year or so ago. The first time I did a story on Brett Turner on the Cleveland Skateboarding Instagram. And Brett was just such a wealth of knowledge of, all the people that, obviously came before me, but the people that came before him. And one thing I told Brett I was really interested in is how far back, like, skateboarding as a subculture in Cleveland goes, right? So I started in '88, and I feel like a lot of the guys or girls, the skaters that came before me, it just seemed like I can never really get past the mid '80s. It seemed like most people started, the older generation than me started '84, '85, somewhere in the mid '80s.
Mhm.
And when I say started skateboarding, I mean, it being the subculture as we know it, right?
Right.
Not just how far back did kids ride skateboards in Cleveland, right?
Mhm.
That's not what I'm interested in. It's like, when did it actually become a subculture type thing? So back then, talking to Brett, he had mentioned your name, and I was like, Garth, like I don't know this guy. I've never heard the name. I don't know. And he was like, yeah, you got to track down Garth. He's the guy. He predates, so many people. So anyways, and I don't know, I got your number, whatever. We talked, what did we talk, like a year or so ago?
Yeah, like probably like for 3 hours. And then once we were done, you're like, okay, now forget everything. Because once I
Yeah.
get this podcast thing figured out, you're going to have to sort of tell the stories again. So,
Yeah. And here we
um,
are.
yeah.
Side note really quick. So I'm looking at my screen right now, and I keep glitching out for some reason. If it looks like I'm glitching or you're glitching, just don't even worry about it. Try to play through,
Okay.
because I have this has happened to me before with actually when I did Brett Turner's, and then when I played it all back, it was all smooth and all good.
Okay.
So we'll just roll with it. So yeah, well, thanks for doing this, Garth. I really appreciate it, and yeah, we need to uh, start this conversation all over again so everyone can hear this, because when I talked to you the first time, I was just so blown away. You were the first person I talked to that predated, so many of the other people that I knew of the
Yeah.
older generation. So let's start it off. A couple basic things I like to ask people is, um, what year were you born?
So I'm 1966. So I'm 58 now.
Dang, you're 58.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. Yeah. Awesome. So you're 58, and you started skateboarding when?
Yeah, so I am that sort of 76 era kid when skateboarding was wildly popular. And so I probably skated at that point from like 76 to 78. And I got Skateboard World, um, and, was very much into it during that time, but it's just a kid phase. I was 10 years old, and, I'd read the magazines and it was exciting. I was really fortunate in that probably 76, 77. Even though I grew up pretty much in Ohio, I was born in San Diego in Coronado. So 76, 77 went to San Diego. I got my first real board, which was a Stacy Peralta Warp Sail 2,
Wow.
uh, green Kryptonics, 60 millimeter. And then I was just a little short of money, so I could not get the Tracker mid tracks. Instead, I got the ACS 500s, which were also fine. And I actually still have the board, not the other stuff. And that was also cool because there was a park in San Diego called Oasis, and it was very short lived, as parks were during that era, maybe
Yeah.
a year and a half, 2 years. And again, I'm like a 10-year-old kid. I've got my new real board, precision bearings, and the whole thing. And yeah, it was nuts. It was just like in the magazines, right? There's these massive snake runs. I ride down to the bottom of the snake run. There's this pool that looks like the Grand Canyon to me, and I sort of peer over the edge. There's a couple guys skating in it, and everything's just kind of like, I can't process it all because I'm just
Yeah.
this little kid. Um, so it was like it was pretty cool. And in actually Warren, Ohio, which is pretty much where I grew up, we even had a little skate park at that point. It was probably like 5 or 6 feet deep, had a little pump bump in the middle, rounded edges.
What year was that?
That would have been
Those
76,
70s?
77. Yeah, I'm trying to think what the name of that thing was. Oh, it's called Surfs Up.
Surfs Up in Warren, Ohio. All
It
right.
was, yeah, I mean, it is what it is. But, there were guys there and they'd build like the wood extensions to it, maybe 2 or 3 feet up. And, so I think people were trying to do what they could do. And like, it's all very cool, right? I can remember going into that skate shop in San Diego and like, I remember the smell of walking into that store in Ocean Beach, just the boards and the
Do you
urethane.
remember
So
what? Do you remember what shop it was?
I don't, but it was definitely in Ocean Beach. It was definitely, 3 closet sizes. It was very small, but just jam packed, and just, and again, I walk in there and they're like, hey, what do you want to get? And I'm overwhelmed, but yeah, and I got my board and I got a yo-yo's wheels sticker and some other stickers, the whole thing. And so it was like super fun, but as it is with like kids, by 12 or whatever, 11, 12, everyone moved on. We were doing different things. Skateboarding had sort of died down at that point anyway. So that stuff stayed in the garage. But I've got like not amazing, but they're funny shots. So in that era on my driveway, my dad would chop wood for the winter. And there's a piece of plywood, like propped up probably at this angle. And I'm on that doing a backside kick turn, the wheels highly elevated as you used to do for a kick turn. It wasn't just a low. And I got a Kiss shirt on. We got my Adidas and my
Awesome.
Levi's. And yeah, so, it was super fun. But that was kind of the kid thing. And I think, what you and I talked about, and I think that's maybe the most important, is the subculture part of it. And that's going to happen in a couple years for me. But the subculture, not just skateboarding, but I think it's that intersection of skateboarding and punk, but in my case, in hardcore. Like, I
Yeah.
think when those two things came together, like that's when it really became something ownable. It became like a teenage thing where this is my identity. This is who I'm going to be,
Yeah.
Which every teenager looks for who they're going to be, what their sense of identity is. And I just think I got lucky. I got skateboarding and I got hardcore, the good elements of hardcore. And like that stuff is stuck with me forever,
Yeah.
still
Me,
now.
same for me as well. I feel like, and I could be way off on this because I didn't live through being a skateboarder in the 60s or the 70s. I came into the late 80s and, and I've said this many times before, skateboarding and punk rock / underground music, hardcore, all that kind of stuff of, from the mid 70s to the late 80s. It came to me on the same day. So to me, it was like the music was somehow intertwined with the philosophy of what it meant to be a skateboarder.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that is now with young kids, if there's like a big separation between, I'm sure there is a big separation between music and skateboarding, right? Which is fine. It's something different for everybody. But yeah, maybe you're right. Like it had something to do with those two things colliding. at that certain time, like the music, that type, not just music, but that particular type of music and skateboarding.
For sure. I think even when you and I first talked, you're like, "Are you really from Cleveland?" I'm like, "Nope,"
Yeah.
but are you part of the Cleveland skateboard history? Like, absolutely. And I think like if you go back to 1980, which is I started to sort of get back into it again and stuff. Um, it wasn't like, oh, I go to school with jocks and burnouts, and there's a couple punker kids. There was nothing, right? It was jocks, maybe some nerds, probably me, and burnouts. And so when I started kind of getting back into it in 1980, and like I got my old board out. I was like, this is so fun. I'm gonna do this again. And I found an old skateboarder, and it had the subscription card in it. But this is 1980 already, or late 80. And so I sent that in, just like, well, get my subscription. And probably a month or two later, I got a little letter with it. But the first issue of Action Now magazine came. We ceased,
Wow.
publishing Skateboarder. We are now Action Now.
Yeah.
And I've told this story before. It's just like when I stopped, this was still like three wheels out, edgers, airs, frontside airs. There was still obviously really, really gnarly stuff happening, full pipe stuff and everything. But when I got that issue of Action Now, so it wasn't my Stacy Peralta Warptail 2 that was, 7 inches wide. It's suddenly 10-inch boards and there's GNS rollerball wheels. And there's a dude doing an invert. Like, and like cognitive dissonance wise, it was like, what? Literally, what is happening? Like, this isn't like, how did he do that? What is this wide board all about? What are those trucks? And you go flipping and there's ads and it's just almost like, whoa, like it made it even cooler, but it was so foreign at that point. So that was really important because when I got that, not only did I sort of get exposed suddenly to that, but by 81 in skating, I think that's the first issue of Action Now. Like there was punk rock, right? I mean, Devo had already done their probably Freedom of Choice video. I don't know if it was in the first issue, but certainly by the second or third issue of Action Now, there's an ad from Frontier Records. And Frontier Records, put out Adolescent Stewart's Records, Circle Jerks, China White, TSOL. So
Didn't they do the first Suicidal album?
probably the first Suicidal, yeah, which is, I don't know when that was, 83.
Maybe 80, I'm thinking 83.
Yeah, I think you're right. But of course, then I send off a check and these records arrive. And then it's like, again, totally different, right? I've listened to Kiss and stuff like that. That's my big band. And not paid that much attention to music, but suddenly then there's that part of it. And I'd been sort of like, I think by like 1980, I was exposed to new music. New music meaning like Psychedelic Furs or The Police, things like that you could find at a local record store, but has really nothing to do with punk, let alone hardcore. But I was interested in that stuff, and MTV came out in 81, and they were starving for videos. There's Adam and the Ants video.
Yeah.
This was great, and there's other stuff like that. So I was, you could get Trouser Press at that time, which was kind of a new wavy rock magazine. They would always come with a flexi disc in it.
Wow.
So you start to read about all these different bands, and again, everything's like foreign. I'm in this kind of cult world of Howland, Ohio, outside Warren. There's nothing. I don't have any point of reference to any of this stuff. And so, I'm an only child. I read a lot, pretty insular, and it just absorbed all that stuff. And it just like really struck me. So, 1980, I may have been wearing skinny ties and, pointed shoes around junior high or high school.
Awesome.
By 82, though I got a shaved head and, probably a De Kreutzen shirt on and who knows what, So the world really changed for me within this very short time frame, around 1980. And then by 83, so this period from 80 to 83 to me was like the crux of everything that came afterward.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting hearing you say all this stuff because I was just flashing back to um, what it was like for me when I started skating in '88. You know, keeping on the topic of how that music was so intertwined was I when you would get to the back of Thrasher magazine, even in the late '80s, there were the ads of the places where cheap skates or whatever that you could order skateboards from, and then the next page was always some rock and roll place that you could buy your T-shirts from, and it was always punk rock T-shirts.
Yeah,
So there,
yeah,
I seriously got it. I've heard about bands only because of those ads being run in Thrasher magazine, Susie and the Banshees, Public Image Limited. I mean, it was
yeah.
they. I feel like it was always like there was always a Susie and the Banshees T-shirt for sale, and like a Sex Pistols and a Dead Kennedys and a Misfits, and so it was just it was so intertwined, that kind of music. So yeah, I can, as a kid, you just feel like, well, this is the music that goes along with skateboarding. So this is kind of the philosophy that goes along with what it is to be a skateboarder. It's
For
probably
sure.
changed a lot since
Like,
then, but
yeah, like Action Now. I think that first issue had DP in it. Talking about punk rock and
yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
and like I said, so I was nudging into this sort of like whatever alternative music, and then just again, that's kind of like how haphazard everything is at this point. I was at Eastwood Mall in Warren playing Donkey Kong, wanted to master that game, and I had my Vans on. Wearing those shoes to school was like, you get ridiculed. Like, what are those
oh
shoes?
yeah,
Those aren't Nikes. Those aren't Adidas. Like, you're not rich enough to buy regular shoes.
yeah.
But some dude comes up to me at the arcade. He's like, Vans. I'm like, yeah, Vans. He's like, do you skateboard? He's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, yeah. He's like, I got a friend that skateboards, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool. And my dad had found the old half pipe from that old skate park in Warren, and we had that in our backyard, all rickety, barely standing kind of thing. So he took my number. Like that day, this guy comes over. This guy Jeff Stroop. He's got
I
more.
Turner has, I've heard that name before. Jeff Stroop.
So he's a good one because he skated most of the SoCal parks. He grew up in Ohio, Cortland, outside Warren, but he skated Skate City and all those places. So he came over, you know, and it really wasn't like assessing each other because at that point it's just like, holy moly, like you actually skateboard. And then, I
Yeah,
had 7 inches by then and, you know, like probably late 81, early 82. And so he's checking through all that stuff. And it was important because I was only 14-ish and he was already of driving age. And he was like a little more proactive because he, knew about in Coventry record store there to go
yes, Record
visit.
Revolution.
Yeah, so we go to Record Revolution and
That was my first place. Yeah,
yeah, so we went there and of course took all my money I had and I bought all these records. Again, a lot of that kind of new wavy stuff, but also Dead Kennedys and Black Flag and you can pick up Flipside magazine. So then I get Flipside magazine, and then shortly thereafter, Maximum Rock and Roll comes out, probably 82-ish. And when you're exposed to all that, then like those things are just loaded with ads, right? Maximum Rock and
yeah,
Roll, you can go through there and then you're reading about bands that are from the Midwest. And you're like, oh wow, like it's not an LA thing. This is here.
yeah,
But I don't know where. I mean, these guys are in Detroit or wherever. But this guy Jeff Stroop was like he would get the Cleveland Plain Dealer. You'd have to go to some newsstand, 30 minutes away just to get a Plain Dealer. And he
yeah.
looked at the listings and he saw like a show with weird band names. And he's like, this got to be a punk show, you know? So, and it was either the South Euclid show or the Dale was our first show, like real hardcore show. And the Dale was a place in Akron, Ohio. And so the Dale probably holds 50 people, absolute maximum. And like we show up there, there's an out of town band playing called New Jersey's Finest. There's the Zero Defects, who are this absolutely amazing, like just kind of bonkers hardcore band. They're on the All Quiet from the Western Front compilation that Maximum Rock and Roll put out. Their stuff is up on, Apple and all that stuff now. But like then suddenly, like these are real hardcore dudes. They got shaved heads and they're in bands, and this stuff is not. This isn't Orange County punk or hardcore. This is Midwest hardcore. This stuff is really fast, really hard. But the nicest thing was, so we pull up this little crappy bar in Akron, a little bit intimidated because, skinny little dude and don't really understand this stuff that much. And this guy comes out, he's like, well, we walk in the courtyard, there's a couple little janky quarter pipes. Oh, and this guy comes out, Vince Rancid, he's like, skateboarders. He's like, never met us before. He's like, yeah, bring your skateboard, let's skateboard on this stuff. Like super welcoming. I mean, the skateboarding thing was cool, but the point was like, oh, like we've never seen you guys before. And this is already like, 82. So hardcore had been around for a couple of years in Cleveland at that point. And so it was a bit insular, but he was super welcoming, tuned us into a bunch of stuff. And Vince is like, he was just a really good guy and came out of the Akron, Kent scene, maybe like proto hippie punk stuff. But like Vince is the guy that did the MDC Multi-Death Corporation 7-inch cover. That's the artist who did that cover.
Okay.
Vince did the Raw Power album cover for the Italian band.
Yeah.
Power. He did the Guns, which was a local hardcore band and one of the best hardcore bands ever. So I think part of that was like so cool. Like he welcomed us in. We got exposed to this, what I'd like to call like more like real hardcore. This stuff was really intense, and was very welcoming, which was super important. Like, 14 or 15-year-old kid is not exactly the most confident kid necessarily, and he was really welcoming. And then I got to say, man, it was just on. Like there was a show in South Euclid, kind of a famous Cleveland hardcore history one. Negative Approach came in for that, and then all the local bands, the Guns, the Agitated, the Offbeats, on and on, probably 8 bands. And so we show up at that thing, and then that probably had 120 people or 100 people. It was a bigger show, I guess.
Yeah.
And like I bought the Negative Approach 7-inch from Brannon at that show. I bought a little compilation tape that was, probably recorded on a boombox of all the local bands. So you really had to listen carefully to actually discern any music.
Yeah.
But you can imagine, again, like Action Now was like, what the heck's going on when I got that thing? And then going to these shows was like, not only what the heck, but also like, oh, this is it. And you know, you can skate and you can be a part of something like exceptionally cool, and no one knows about it, which is important at that time.
Right.
And I was in a secret club, and I was in a club that, I thought was the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, agreed. That's exactly how it was for me as well. And I think that's probably how it was for a lot of us way back then. It was like, it also just felt like skateboarding was so much more than just talent, right? It was like, it wasn't just, learning tricks and being the best, or it was just so much more than that,
I mean, you just meet these friends, this is like, so am I a part of the Cleveland skateboarding scene? Yeah, from Warren. And ultimately I went to Kent for, college, but I was in Cleveland all the time at the Lake.
Sure.
The club up in, Cleveland. I was in Akron at those shows. And at that same Dale show, or the second one, I met this guy, Chris Leonard. And he's like, I
think I've heard that name too.
Yeah, he's Brecksville guy. And, he says, I've got a half pipe. I'm thinking like mine, my 6-foot high wobbling thing in the backyard. But he's like, yeah, come up. So we came up to his place, and it wasn't 8. So it probably was around 9 feet. Only had deck on one side. I think it was only 12 feet wide at that point. But it was a real half pipe. Like he had notched the transitions to put the 2x4s in. You hadn't just nailed them into the
Oh,
sides like we
wow.
did. Like, he built
Yeah.
it correctly, and it's like, oh, this is like a real half pipe, and that was like amazing. It's just plywood and PVC coping and stuff like that. Nothing amazing, but it was like, wow, that thing. So we spent hours and hours on that, and learned tricks, listen to music, of course, and again, everything started to feel start to coalesce. And I'd still say at that point, 82-ish, it's itty bitty, right? I happened to run into this guy at this hardcore show, but it's still like, it's this guy Jeff Stroop, who lives relatively close to me. Chris Leonard's got the half pipe. There's a neighbor that skates. There's this other guy, Bob Max. He skates a little bit. There's still like really only very few of us. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
didn't know anyone else at that point, really. I think I feel like let me just go back real quick. I think part of this identity thing came back from that South Euclid show, which was a big deal. Negative Approach only got to play 2 songs before it got shut down. It's called the South Euclid Riot in history,
Oh, my
because
God.
there's a McDonald's right behind it. That's where the jocks were. They see these people with mohawks and shaved heads, and of course there's conflict and stuff like that. And but if you have 100 punk rockers or really hardcore kids running outside to confront these jocks, there's a little bit of that solidarity thing going on as well. So when you go
Sure.
back to Warren, Ohio to high school, you're just, and like, I had friends there and they're very nice people, but that was not my world anymore. And then, so when I was 81, 2, and I heard about straight edge, which I think again is great. But I really glommed onto that as much as anything is just a way to give the middle finger to all these people in my high school. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to live my life like you guys. Like, I'm now a part of this thing where I'm skateboarding. I see people doing bands, putting on shows, making fanzines. Like, it was just like so self-empowering, that so much you could do, and you'd be recognized for it because there's only a few of you, and it was just like that was everything at that point. And
Yeah. Well, I think also, you kind of started tapping on it a little bit, and this is my perspective of, yeah, you're a skater from Warren, and we're talking about Cleveland skateboarding, uh, history and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is that even when I started skating, it was very small, right? Like, you had a couple friends in school or whatever, but it was kind of like you against the whole the school, if not the world, because there just weren't people like you. You didn't, other than, Thrasher magazine or a little bit we were catching here or there. We'd go to Record Revolution that kind of tap into some
yeah,
culture. Um, you know, it just wasn't a part of mainstream society at all. It was very anti, and we fought a lot because of that. So your community wasn't just, whoever's like in your little town, all right? It's just like you start branching out and realizing there's other people all around. But going
right.
back to your generation, there's and I forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember we talked about this last time, is that back then, late 70s, early 80s, this whole subculture of skateboarding was so small that there really wasn't that many people in Cleveland or Youngstown or Akron or Canton. So really, you kids, let's just say, it was like you little bits from all around that really, yeah, you didn't live in Cleveland city limits or whatever, but were you tapped into this whole world and a part of it? I believe so. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah, we go to
you guys
Cleveland. We go
had to. You
to
guys had to be like, oh my god, like you do what I do, and you live like an hour and a half away. All right, well, you're in it. You're still a part of it, and like that networking that just had to happen to have that kind of community and to make friends with like-minded people, you know?
Yeah, it was nuts, you know. Well, we would go to shows in Cleveland a lot, and you know, we'd skate the banks at the I think their police headquarter banks there, and there'd be
Yeah.
legends around, and
Yeah.
you know, of course, that became the ritual. You go skate before the show, between bands, you know, and you'd be just cruising around. I think in Akron there was a parking garage near the Dale. It was the first time a gun was, I guess, technically pulled on me.
Oh,
We were just skating around, and that was a security guy's like, stop, stop. And of course, you know, so we start skating away and we hear a gunshot. And it was a cop. And the cop comes up to us and is like, well, next time, you know, an officer tells you to stop, you'll learn to stop. And, you know,
jeez.
of
Oh,
course,
Pete.
you know, what it taught us was like, oh, that stereotype about cops, a lot of that's true. You know, like that was
Yeah.
ridiculous. Pull a gun on
I wonder if that
kids.
was Cascade Plaza. Do you remember the name of that parking garage?
I don't. It was probably like 5 or 6 stories. Really fun. I mean,
Might
we did
be. Yeah.
the loops over and over again.
It
Um,
might be. If it is
yeah,
Cascade Plaza, I know somebody else that has a story maybe going all the way in the 90s of, I think, a cop pulling a gun on him or something in that parking garage. Like, well, I don't know what it is. If it's the same garage, but yeah.
probably. You know, and the kind of funny thing around this whole time, so like you almost start to accrete different friends. So Jeff Stroop, both rode bowls and stuff, transition, but also freestyled. And I do have a
Mm,
history in freestyle as well.
yeah.
It out there, you know, you got to admit it.
Yeah.
Um,
That's all right.
um, uh, this other, a couple other guys, and I'd say by '83 there was a JFA show in Kent, Ohio, at JB's down, and I think that was the first time I'd met. We probably had like 20 people we knew that skated at that point, but that show was like probably over 100 kids were there, skateboard kids, you know, who we'd never seen
Wow.
before. JFA at
Wow.
that, because you know by that point Thrasher's out a couple year or two. Everyone got maximum rock and roll, and that was kind of a crazy thing to see because it's like, oh wow, you know, who knows where they all came from. And the JF guys were exactly kind of what you thought they were going to be. They showed up. Uh, I was there early. There was a bank outside JB's, but in other good spots on campus. And yeah, they're like, yeah, let's go skate. So let's drive our green school bus, you know,
God,
over to
so awesome.
campus. And so we skated. I just started a fanzine. I was going to put my first issue out. I did a long interview with them. It was called Fun Stuff. And yeah, it was okay zine, but the interview was good because they kind of slagged on Suicidal
Mm,
during the interview. And so when I got done with the zine and I sent it out, of course, Maximum Rock and Roll on the flip side, I sent it out also to, you know, these other zines and other places. And it got good reviews, mainly because JFA was, you know, not afraid to speak their mind, I think. And then suddenly, you know, I'm getting hundreds of letters in for, you know, I want a copy of this. And I was cleaning out my stuff from back home a few years ago, and I found like a stack of envelopes with $1 inside that I had just never gotten back to. You know, because
no way.
it was
Wow.
like inundated with people wanting it.
Wow.
So sorry for those I
That,
didn't get back to.
wow. That's super
Um,
cool.
yeah, so that was cool, and I think the size thing, you know, you can even think about it as the Midwest in general, because in 1983 there was this thing called the MESS series started, and that was the Mid-Eastern Skateboard Series.
Yeah.
And it was all backyard ramps. It was listed in Thrasher, and by the second year, I even had an article on it. But that first contest, which was at Squid's Ramp, I think in Springfield, I think there's 30 people, and that's people from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Tennessee, Kentucky, Carolinas, you know, like everywhere. So
Yeah.
that's people coming together. Uh, Squid's Ramp was a little bigger. The second one was Downey's, just southern near Ohio, near Dayton. 8 foot high ramp, 16 feet wide. Um, and, you know, these are like, this is Bob Pribble, Jeff Kendall, Marty Jimenez was there because he was kind of a split coast guy or split
Yeah.
area guy. Uh, on and on. Brian Ridgway, who later, you know, moved,
Oh, yeah.
was one of the
Ridgeway.
older guys at, yeah, Trans World.
Yeah.
So Jeff Stroop and I had gone down. Leonard went down. Chris
I used to
Leonard.
work with Ridgway.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice guy. Yeah.
Yeah. When I moved out to California in the late 90s, I, I rode for a company that was distributed out of Climax Distribution, which was Larry Balma, and that's Tracker
Uh-huh.
Trucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't ride for, but I rode indies, but I
Mm.
worked at Tracker, like shipping trackers and all this stuff. But Ridgway,
Yeah.
I was there when Ridgway was still the guy. He was still team manager and running Tracker Trucks. Tony Hawk's had his truck on there. And
Huh.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's how
Yeah.
I
I
know
think,
Ridgway.
and you start to have this little bit of like Midwest pride, GSDs from Southern Ohio and one of
Yeah.
the early scenes, Skate
Yeah.
Fate, inventor of the boneless one.
Mm-hmm.
We knew about that stuff pretty early. And then, like I said, with hardcore bands like the Necros, and you got Negative Approach and The State in Detroit, plus all these amazing bands like the Guns in Cleveland, it was like, oh, that's some stuff going on here, It's that weird Midwest thing that happened. So those contests were cool because it did bring people together, but also showed just how itty bitty the whole skateboard world was at that point. The people that were like really into it,
Yeah.
I think that
It,
first one was the first time I heard Rudimentary Peni. I
oh,
was
wow.
like, oh, that's like, yeah, it was killer.
It's interesting how much it has grown to where you go to a skateboard event now and well, like I've toured since the late 90s around the world, and it got to a point where every demo you did, there were
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of skaters in every city you went to. And it gets to a point where if you go and roll up to a demo and there's 50 skaters, you're like, why is it such a ghost town? Like, that's what it's become. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah,
And if there's still more skaters out there that don't even show up, but back then it was like, yeah, if like 20 people show up, it's like, wow, man, we've got something going on here. Like, this is crazy, you know?
yeah. And definitely between 82 and 3, things started to really, I think, pick up steam. And while Leonard had that half pipe, there were two other half pipes that were going on a touch earlier, I think, than Chris's. One was Jim Sleece, uh, who later became singer in a band I was in. He was a roller skater and skateboarder. He had a good sized half pipe. And then Jim Angeles, who died a few years ago, unfortunately. But Jim was one of those guys that kind of came from the 70s, kept going, super stylish. Again, half pipe with a channel in it, beautiful frontside airs over it and stuff like that. So there's stuff out
Where were those ramps at?
both. I think Sleeth's was in Novelty, Ohio, and
Oh,
then Angeles was somewhere in Cleveland proper,
yeah.
but
Wow.
suburb. Those ramps have started to decline a little bit. Like just had, they've been up for a year or two probably, and so they were starting to get a little worn out. Leonard's ramp was still in good shape, so we skated that one primarily.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey,
So
I got something it just slips my mind. I need to circle back to was you mentioned record revolution on Coventry. So that was a super pivotal place for me
mm,
because it's a straight shot through the east side of Cleveland from Garfield Heights down to Coventry, and I heard about it right out of the gate when I got into skateboarding and punk rock music. It was the older
yeah,
guys that brought me into this world. Were like, yeah, you got to go to Record Revolution. Did they sell skateboards back then when you went there?
no.
No. Okay. So
They may
I
have
was
had
lucky enough.
stickers, but
Yeah.
no actual skateboards. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was lucky enough to catch that window of their history. So Record Revolution, that's the first place I got. I was still riding like a generic board. I was riding a Volterra out of my neighbor's trash can.
Mm.
And I got a set of GNS trucks. This was
Ah,
1988, by the way. This is like the
yeah.
summer of 1988. I got a set of GNS trucks and a pair of fluorescent pink slime ball wheels from Record Revolution. So at that time, probably just for like 88, 89, somewhere right in that era, you would go into Record Revolution and they had all the punk t-shirts. In fact, when my
Hmm.
mom wanted to take me back for back to school shopping, I always demanded we go to Record Revolution, and my mom and dad would buy me the punk rock T-shirts off the walls at Record Revolution. So
Yeah.
they had all the T-shirts, the punk rock T-shirts. They had all the punk rock albums, and then they had a whole wall. The whole straight back wall was skateboards, and they
Huh.
had like 2 cases full of wheels and trucks and other hard
Wow.
goods like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they closed down maybe within the past year, so they're totally gone now.
Ah, bummer. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know they hit hard times back like in the '90s when everything. I think. Well, yeah, when records just took a dump and
Yeah.
everything started going online. But I think the guy who ended up buying it was like a he. I believe the story goes. I forget his name, but he was the guy. He was like a local punk rocker guy that used to hang out down in that zone, and
Hmm.
he ended up getting Record Revolution, and he still ran Record Rev for a long time. But it got smaller and smaller. I remember he brought skateboards back into it in the early 2000s or mid 2000s, but it was kind of,
Yeah.
it was kind of not, wasn't like it was back in the day or whatever. But anyways, that's just, I'm glad you brought that up because Record Revolution, I think, at least for some of us of that era, was a real, I think there was a kind of a real pivotal skateboard related destination in Cleveland.
Yeah. We would go there. There was a bank to wall right behind.
Yeah, it's still there.
And I would go up in there
Skaters
and do
know
walk
that.
and rolls. Yeah, I'd go up on
Yeah.
that wall, walk and roll off of it, and you'd always scout out spots. There was
Yeah.
also a record store called Chris's Warped Records, Chris
Yes.
Andrews,
Yep.
um, much smaller, more focused on hardcore and punk. I don't think he had much of anything else,
Yeah.
and so we go up there a lot too. You know, you just go right to the 7-inch bin and try to get all these 7 inches and other stuff. So that was pretty instrumental to us. Chris Andrews, again, very nice guy.
Yeah.
These goofballs coming in with bucket hats. We're not coming in with leather jackets and spikes and stuff. We're coming in goofy skate gear. But that place was really important. Save money, go up there, get hardcore records, go home and memorize the lyrics and all of that stuff. So yeah, those two places were important to us for sure because like there yeah, Record Rev certainly did not have records. No place did not have skateboards, and no place really had skateboards around me. So like in the wintertime in Ohio, my road trackers at that time, the kingpins would bust all the time because it was so cold out and they rode by
Yeah.
the truck too tight
Yeah.
all the time. And so I was freestyling as well, but my kingpin on my regular board had broken. So now I have to, send a check in to the skate shop in California to get a new set of trucks. And while I'm waiting, all I've got is my freestyle board. And so it's on a freestyle board in my driveway on a 6-foot high quarter pipe that I learned to do mute airs and inverts on
Oh
one
my
day.
gosh.
It was all I had. And,
Yeah.
once I learned a mute air, then my friend Jeff Stroop was like, well, just put your hand on it because that's a hand plan. It's
Yeah.
basically the same kind of trick. So I learned both those tricks on a freestyle board.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that maybe a lot of younger skaters don't realize, but um, again, I'm just referring back to my experiences getting into skating in '88. There was a lot of my skateboard friends in Garfield Heights. It's like, so we were looking at the videos of the times and all that, and there was always a freestyle. Like every skateboard video had your street skating, you had freestyle, you had vert, and you had some pool, right? And so it was really normal. I never had one. I wanted one, but it was really normal where um, skaters would have their regular board. We street skated the most in Garfield Heights. We didn't have any ramps, but then some of my friends got freestyle setups. And then at one point, I even remember I had my Caballero. It was kind of a mistake to buy. It was like just too big for me. I was a really little kid. So I had the Caballero, and then my next board was a Per Wellender street board. So it was smaller. So I remember as a 13, 14-year-old kid, I was like, Well, the Perwelender's my street board, and the Caballero's my ramp board. But dude, I never had a ramp. Like we didn't have any ramps. So what am I talking about? Like there's no ramps. But anyways, my point is that I don't know. It just predates that whole. Now there's so much video and interviews where people where they want to be like, oh, the freestylers were blah blah blah, whatever. But I think if you really break it down to your average kid trying to have fun in whether it's Warren, Ohio, Garfield Heights, or wherever. No, man, it was like no, we street skated, and then some of us, like some people brought out freestyle boards and did that, and then if there was a ramp, we tried to do. You just kind of did everything because it was in the video. It was like okay, and I always say this, and I was always a skater that never hated. That whole weird opinion stuff never came until my 20s, which is where usually hits a lot of people, unfortunately. But when I was a kid, it was like, hey man, if it was in a magazine or a video, it's cool to me, man, because I wasn't in that video. I wasn't in that magazine. So you're street skating, you're freestyling, you're skating pullers, you're skating vert. To me, it was like, they're all awesome to me, you know?
It was all skateboarding. Like I had a
Yeah.
quarter pipe. Friends had quarter pipes just in our local area. So yeah, we'd skate that. Then I got my freestyle board, and we're on a driveway. So why not freestyle? And then in the winter, you're not outside. It's freezing many days, so you're in the garage freestyling.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And it was really great. I mean, that's board control. You know, some
Yeah.
may argue that that's probably half of street skating's background right there from Rodney
Yeah.
Mullen and others. I mean, those are foundational tricks. So yeah, like even there was a Tennessee contest for the Mess series, probably '83, and there was a freestyle contest. There's Jeff Stroop got first. I got second on the ramp. I think in my little division, I got seventh or something. But so I had that, and I won one freestyle and a couple of the local things. So I was all like, I'm a freestyle guy. I mean, maybe I'm not that great. Won't be like sponsored on ramp, but I'm a freestyle guy. So I sent out sponsor me letters to like, well, Walker in Florida, which was kind of a gimme. They were going to do something, but Vision, blah, blah, blah. And I also sent one to Pal Peralta. So, and very nice. Stacy Peralta wrote a nice letter back to me.
They're like, hey, you were like, hey, man, I know you got this guy called, this guy named Rodney, but, you might want to check out my tape.
Yeah, because look at this, man. Like, here's an article on Thrasher, and see my name. I'm second place out of 5 people that entered a freestyle contest there.
Hey, but that was kind of huge back then. Back then, it was like those contest results. Companies looked at that,
Yeah, it mattered, and so
It did.
yeah, so he wrote back this very nice letter. Hey Garth, great to hear from you. Freestyle is totally happening. It's same thing. It's all part of skateboarding and moving it forward. At this time, not even rude about it.
Yep.
At this time, we're not looking at bringing on additional team members, but all the best. Keep skating. Blah blah blah. Stacy Peralta.
Yeah.
And that's like, I mean, that says a lot about
Garth. Do you still have that letter?
I do, and I posted it fairly recently, and
oh, I think I remember that.
Yeah, you've probably seen it. A lot of people, everyone was like, how cool Stacy Peralta do that. And then the other half of my good friends be like, and let me just read this carefully. You used to freestyle? So, of course, I still get the banter. Yeah.
Whatever, man. Whatever.
Well, we have up here, I live in Marin, just north of, the city, San Francisco. And we have a Saturday old man session at a local park. Scott Foss, original Bones Brigade guy, skates with us all the time. Good guy. But so I showed him. I was like, it is what it is. And he's like, yeah, that's Stacy's a good guy. So I know he forwarded that copy or the photo of that letter to Stacy. Like, you're a good guy. You bothered to respond to some goof from Ohio that, was in this contest. And so I was really into it. I every once in a while I still think about getting back into it, but I'm like, I should just get like a regular street board, and I could probably still do like, Caspers and a lot of those basic freestyle tricks or something.
Yeah.
So through '83, right? You can just see it's just like, boy, everything's new, and hardcore was super important. Bands were coming through all over. I mean, so many bands during that time. The number of skaters is getting bigger and bigger. I believe in 83 or 4 is when the Elf Ramp was built in Bay Village.
Yeah, I've
The
heard
Elf
lots
Ramp
about the elf
was,
ramp.
yeah, I believe Tom Biercheck, probably Lurch, Little Rich were all involved. Maybe Rick Cargi was back by then and helped build it. Standard, it was 16, I think, 8 feet high because that's 2 sheets of plywood height, and you cut 8 feet, and that's
Yeah.
an 8 foot ramp, easy
Yep.
peasy. Um, and that started to draw people in. It was in the middle of this like empty lot with woods all around it, and so that became like a scene. It wasn't that far away from like the Cleveland Underground or other places to go see bands, so there'd be sessions there a lot. And I think people started to get better, not because of the ramp, just because there was a bunch of people that were really committed to it and were skating a lot, and could do stuff. And I've never been great. I just work really hard until I can get a trick. And then if I do it a gazillion times, maybe it even has a little style to it. But it was really then when Little Rich showed up there. And when Little Rich showed up, he's just so natural, both in style and talent and everything. I think it was kind of like that, oh, that's how we should be skating. We shouldn't be
Yeah.
early grabbing everything, or if you're going to do a hand plant, you really should try to invert it, not done a hand plant. I think Rich, to me at least, kind of changed the tenor of Cleveland skateboarding because he brought, within a few short years, he had built that half pipe in his backyard and was blasting, 5-6 foot airs. And, that was, he's a big boy, right? He's Little Rich, but he's a big boy skater and
Yeah.
really showing everyone how it should be done.
And for those that, I don't know if you said his last name, but that's Rich Hamilla you're talking about,
Yeah.
which some people watching this might be familiar. I did a story on him early into the whole Instagram account because he was a guy that I didn't know him when I was young, but he was when I started branching out of Garfield Heights and skating. Really, like when you started skating downtown Cleveland a lot, you'd start meeting skaters from other parts of the city because a lot of young skaters back then would take the RTA bus into Public Square, whether it's from the west side, east side, southeast side, wherever. You'd get dropped off in Public Square. You'd start meeting other people there, and then that would maybe the combination of going out to the Berea Rolling Bowl, 88, 89.
Uh-huh.
That's when you started hearing about the other names. So back then I didn't even know the guy, but that was like one of the names I remember hearing about and hearing it from people that you already thought were gnarly. You know what I mean? Like you're hearing this from the guys that you're like, oh, dude, you're like one of the best. Like you're so gnarly or whatever. But they're always talking about this guy, Richie. Oh, he's the man. So
Yeah.
that's who we're talking about.
Yeah, Rich Mill is amazing, nickname because of his stature. Everyone had a nickname back then. But yeah, I can do front setters. Oh, I can't I can't pop it out and do
Yeah.
that. Everything just was like different. Like in 1981, this guy Tim Dunbar had moved from San Diego to Cleveland area. He was in a band called Positive Violence, which is on the New Hope compilation, a very early Cleveland hardcore compilation. Tim was a bit sketchy. I think he had to leave for various reasons, but to Ohio where his dad was. But he at least would try. Like he would go on Leonard's ramp. He would try a huge ollie, just like a Jason Jesse ollie. It was big. He never landed it though, so it was still like a little bit of an abstraction to see someone go, that big.
Yeah.
And so there were folks out there that it wasn't like it was a wasteland, people that could ride California style, with power or whatever in style. But I think it was just Rich. It was like, not only is he doing it, he's making everything. He's learning stuff every single day. It's good. And I had already been to Del Mar by that point. I'd go Del Mar a lot when I was in San Diego.
So were you always going back to California because you had ties there, like family ties?
Yeah. So I'd go back, like maybe a couple weeks of summer,
Oh, okay.
pretty much every year. So I did get to skate Del Mar a lot, and saw. I didn't see any contests out there, but I definitely, boy, by '83, there's not many people skating Del Mar, so it was always like McGill,
How
all this.
how old were you when you moved to Ohio?
I was 4.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're born in Coronado, military family.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad was a
Yeah,
dentist in the Navy.
yeah.
So
So it was on Coronado, the base on Coronado there.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. My neighbor works on that base.
Ah,
Every day drives from Oceanside all the way down the 5 over the Coronado, the Bay Bridge down to that base. Yeah, I know that base well.
yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to, I straddled 2 worlds, right? Because
Yeah,
I grew up in the Golden Triangle, basically of Cleveland, Akron, Youngstown, you know.
yeah,
Uh, but I still go to San Diego because my parents divorced, and
yeah,
so
yeah.
so I saw stuff out there. But again, it just was like, I mean, I could do hand plants in the bowl there and whatever, but you
That's cool
know,
though. So you're this Ohio kid. You're a skater from Warren that's intertwined with, you everyone, the skaters in Cleveland and Akron and all over the whole region, going the shows and all that. But then you're bouncing out to California. You're skating Del Mar. You're
yeah.
skating all these like places. Everyone just hears about in the magazines or sees in the magazines.
And I
That's
think,
really interesting.
yeah, I mean, at that age, you don't sort of worry about the height of things. You know, it was a little bit bigger than the half pipe like Chris had stuff, but it was so easy to ride. I don't think it even had vert on it. And it's not
Yeah,
like I even really knew how to carve. I just go back and forth and half pipe it.
yeah.
And skate the reservoir down below there, bring my freestyle board and do some stuff in the flat in the reservoir. And so yeah, I think like that. But um, it's still Ohio, right? Like I go there, part of that, see the skating there, but it was all about Ohio and Midwest. It was the Mess series. And in
Yeah.
1982 or 3, Chris Leonard and I drove to outside of Detroit. There was one of the bowls that still remained was Endless Summer,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably like a 9 or 10 foot plastered pool they had there. Bill Ferguson was a local. Bill Ferguson's a local ripper, and that's one of the first guys I really saw carving a bowl properly. You know, just power and into a
Yeah.
big trip and stuff like that. And there were guys like, we went up there a few times, like Mark Heinzman, Bill Toko, those guys. You know, we'd skate with those guys. Danforth,
I was
then
just going to
moved.
ask. I literally, when you were talking about this, I was thinking in my head. I was going to ask you if you ever like crossed paths with Danforth because he's an old friend of mine, and
Ah,
he loves talking to me about Ohio and Cleveland. In fact, like when we first met and skated together, it was like this instant bond because of his connection to Cleveland and his connection
hmm.
to Ohio and all that stuff. So I wondered if you crossed paths with him back then.
Yeah, we met him. We were never good friends, but we met him at the second mess contest I went to, whatever that was, 82 probably. He ended up actually staying in a hotel room, and this is a very straight edge Bill Danforth. And
Oh yeah.
um, Leonard's brother had come along with us. He didn't really skate, but just to hang out or whatever. And he had beer in the room. And of course, like Chris and myself are not drinking, and Danforth's like, I'll never drink, and my friend's brother's like, yeah, you will. um, but yeah, Bill was another one of those guys, like so into it. He was at those mess contests. He'd do his 360 air, frontside 360
Yeah.
air,
Yeah.
all the stuff you'd expect. The backside sweeper, not a
Mm-hmm.
jam, backside sweeper, um, uh, and it was very punk rock for sure, right? We
Yeah.
all were pretty punk rock. He definitely had that aggro feel to him when he skated. Uh, I've got actually it was in I don't think, yeah, maybe this issue is the second issue of Fun Stuff, my little zine. I had see if you can see this. There's a centerfold of Danforth doing boneless.
Yes.
That's Dave
Awesome.
O's ramp in the Detroit area that
Awesome.
we went and skated. So yeah, those mess contest series really brought a lot of people together, from all over. And it's interesting. A lot of those guys were sponsored at that time. Brand X was a big sponsor of Midwest skaters around that time.
Oh wow.
Kevin Dickman, Squid, who was
Yeah.
from Southern Ohio but moved to Cleveland to go to university. And so he skated, I think, the half pipe that was available in 88, 89 up there. He lives
Mm-hmm.
out here now too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So
Wow.
Danforth around. So yeah, we had like, again, like you see these influences, right? Like it was kind of cool. Like, oh, they're sponsored skaters from Ohio. And there's
Yeah, and
Todd
it's
Swallow. Todd
who?
Swallow's the drummer for the Necros, and Todd
Okay.
Swallow's a sponsored skateboarder for Powell. You know,
Wow.
Brian Mank became a roadie for the Necros, and he was a Powell guy. Ferguson, of course, Bill Ferguson up there was a killer, and Danforth and stuff, and Heinzman and Toko and all those guys. So yeah, like, but Cleveland didn't really have that. And I think until Rich came along, I thought Rich was like in that same league as those
Yeah.
guys. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I wanted to ask you is when you started getting more uh, intertwined and connected with the skateboarders in Cleveland, who were the who were like the first people? Like who were the first Cleveland skaters? I know probably whoever. What was the guy's name with the ramp in Brecksville?
Chris Leonard was clearly one of the first, other than like Jeff Stroop, who was near, half hour from me. But there was Chris
Yeah.
Leonard, he's Brecksville, so that's Cleveland. And then it, like, again, I think by '83, that's when either before through shows, at the lakefront or elsewhere, but certainly by JFA show, it was Beard Check. It was Mickey Ranillo. I knew Jim Angeles, of course, and Jim Sleeth, uh, uh, Jim Cadillac, Lurch, Skater Die, we used to call him. Um, uh, this guy was Mickey Ranillo. This other guy Mickey was from the far west side. Um, and those would be the names that would sort of come to me offhand. That like we skated a lot together.
So that all those guys kind of come after your generation. You're kind of like you predate like a lot of other than Leonard, right?
Yeah, so
Chris
probably
Leonard,
Chris
you
Leonard and I were
predate.
contemporaries. Yeah,
So you predate those guys, which you probably only predate them by a few years, but back then that was a massive age gap.
yeah, and I think it probably was. I think like Cadillac Lurch he's my age. He's also 58. So like he skated, back at Skateboard Paradise in Elyria, that old park there with Rick Cargy. Rick
Mm-hmm.
Cargy moved probably back he was Cleveland, moved to New Jersey, and then came back to Cleveland. So he was another one of those guys that was in it. And Rick was also, I should say, he wasn't rich, but Rick had skated the barn ramp in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd also come out of a scene with heavy hitters
Yeah.
and kind of bring that attitude back, I think, to
Yeah.
Cleveland. So Rick was really important. And of course, Rick went on to do all sorts of amazing things with skate park building and things like that. But
Yeah. I really want to have Rick on here. So Rick, if you're listening to this, I really want to. I mean, we've texted before a while back about trying to make a connection or whatever, but it's always timing or whatever. But
yeah,
he's interesting to me because of there's always been this kind of I don't know how you want to put it. There's always been this like fascination with older skaters and Black Label and Lucero Limited and John Lucero. There's always been this in Cleveland, which when I would explain this to, if I were to go on tour and explain this, or when when I moved to California, became friends with skaters of my generation from other cities, they didn't understand it. They were like, "What? Like Black Label? Like that's at one time that was such a tiny nothing company, right?" And they never really understood. I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like in Cleveland, like it's a thing. Like Black Label's a thing, and Lucero Limited was a thing, and John Lucero is like a guy that all these older guys that I hang out with like really love, right? And I think I could be wrong. I'd like to have Rick explain this to me, but I've heard the story of he's the one. I believe he's the first one, right, that moved out west, and he ended up becoming good friends with John. Correct?
I think, yeah, I don't want to miss 84 to 88, but I think 88 is when I moved to Huntington Beach. So Lurch had been to Orange County in 85, 86, and 7. I think the first time he went out, some guy slept in a car, didn't last long. And so he started to make connections out there. By the time I was just about ready to graduate college, he had moved out there and was in a house with a couple guys, Dino and Frankie and this other surfer guy. Ricky Barnes was basically living there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so Chris Leonard and I drove out there that summer after he'd moved in. I was there for a couple weeks. Chris stayed a little longer. I had to fly back and finish up summer school class to get my degree. And then I moved out there in 88. So I moved out there in 88 and slept on a couch in Lurch's bedroom, which was mildly traumatizing in many ways. but and so I was there from like 88. I was there for 2 or 3 years. And so I would say the sequence is probably Lurch, me, Karji came out next, I believe. Little Rich was in and out sometimes. I had left by like 91. I was out. I was in San Diego going to graduate school. And so 88, when you move out to Orange County or to Huntington Beach, skate capital, it's like, oh, Chicken had Chicken from Pocket Pistols and Screaming Squeegees had a elliptical mini ramp in his backyard, maybe 6 feet high. Very fun. That was right down the street. There was the Vans half pipe. There were some pools like the Pomona Egg and Nude, and Upland was still open. But there weren't very many of us. So John, all those guys were there, right? I mean, Ricky and, Lorman and Ricky, I think, were the first guys on Black Label, or Lucero Limited at that point.
Yeah.
And so I still know all those guys because, yes, I'm the Ohio goofball, one of many, but, there weren't any people out there. And we all got along great because, like, who else are you going to skate with, right?
Yeah.
And it was super, super fun, right? That was all about, that was kind of a ruckus couple of years for sure. It was living the lifestyle for sure. But, how amazing was that? And I think, I think literally the first day that Chris Leonard and I arrived in Huntington Beach, I hadn't slept much, got some sleep. And I think it was Lurch and then Ricky took us and like, Slappy? No. It's like, let's go. Went to a curb a couple blocks away, learned Slappies within a couple tries, and then that was every night, right? Skate a little bit during the day, do whatever, and then every single night, off to the curb, Slappy, Slappy, Slappy forever. Just so exhausted. So that connection, I think, between Cleveland, Huntington Beach, and John and stuff just snowballed.
It did.
I got these people in and out of there, and he's a great guy, nicest guy in the world, and it naturally just became a thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think when those guys would come back to visit Cleveland, or whether they were coming back to visit or moving back, I think it was their influence bringing that back to places like Schneider's Bike Shop or whatever, and saying, hey, John Lucero started this new company, Lucero Limited. I mean, I know before, not Lucero Limited, Black Label. Because I know before Black Label, I still, like when I would go to the Berea Rolling Bowl, I'd see the older guys riding like a Ricky Barnes Lucero Limited board or whatever it was, or just Lucero Limited boards, right? And then once Black Label came out, it was massive out here. And I think it's because of those guys. But I think it's been a while, but I think like Karji lives down the street from John. Like they're pretty tight.
Yeah, he's just a block away their homes. Yeah. And Rick's basically in Colorado now building non-skate pools with his brother.
Oh, wow.
So when I re-engaged with those guys 10 or 15 years ago or something, it was kind of interesting because a lot of those guys have been married, divorced, had their kids and stuff.
Yeah.
And so literally when I first reconnected with everyone, it was like the old days because like, oh, it's just us. Here we are. Yeah. We're going to do the same thing. Let's go do Slappies and, let's go have a big skate session or whatever. But, I mean, I think not only that connection, John's an amazingly nice guy, but, really his graphics are amazing too. Those boards are beautiful to look at and you want to have those boards.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in my opinion.
Designed amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's always made probably some of the coolest stuff in skateboarding.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
I don't know, maybe I'm just biased because I rode for him for 7 years, and he's the guy that turned me pro. But I mean, no, I really do. I've always felt very fortunate to have that was the company that turned me pro, because there's certain people. I said this. I don't know. I don't know if I said it on this show before or another podcast I did, but as on the road one time with Mike Vallely, and somehow we were talking about, we got on the subject of just how we are who we are, but everyone's perspective you have of like your favorite pro skater or whatever, so much of it is, it's marketing, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's marketing, man. I always say, I was a sponsored skateboarder for this company called Invisible, which was Blockhead's sister company back in the late
Mhm.
90s. I don't think anyone cared. You know what I mean? Like, I was carving my own little way, but no one really cared. But when I got on Black Label, it was at a time where Black Label just started blowing up on an international level. And I, I blew up on Black Label, and it's funny to look back, and it's like so much. It's just, I was the same skater on Invisible as I was on Black Label, and I'm the same skater I am now as I was on Black Label, but it's that marketing, and it takes a special person. Like, so my point about Mike Vallely is, he was saying how lucky we both were, that, because he pointed out, he was like, I think the two best people in skateboarding that know how to like market a rider is Stacy Peralta and John Lucero, right?
Mhm.
And Mike was lucky enough to have both of them. He had
Mhm.
Stacy Peralta market
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
as the guy, the Powell Peralta guy with the elephant
Yeah.
board and public domain and all this. And then he went on to ride for Lucero, same time I did, in when Black Label was blowing up, which is, so it's like marketing and timing and all that stuff. Yeah, John's really
Yeah.
great at it. But anyways, yeah, my whole point was like how, I see it. I still see it to this day in Cleveland, and it's weird because John has become a very good friend of mine since I started riding for him in 1998, right? So it's still interesting to see, like, I don't know, like, there's definitely grown men that swoon over him. I'm like, that's my buddy, dude. Like, it's cool. Let's not make it
Well,
weird
the
though.
other thing I would add, and he's a good marketer, he's an amazing artist, but there's this theory from art. Of course, there's technique and your ability to do stuff, but it's also authenticity.
Oh,
Like people
absolutely.
like this, John is an authentic guy. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's no act about it or anything.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to trick someone into thinking you're authentic. You either are or you're not, and so
Yeah.
that just kind of comes through. And of course, like, yeah, he's in it, and like, why wouldn't you want to be a part of that then? Because he does great stuff, and he's the real deal.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and I think that's just it, is he was really good at, or he still is really good at seeing what's authentic about his riders, and bringing that, like, to the forefront for people to see. And my example with that is, when we were editing Label Kills, the first Black Label video, right? I remember probably including myself and some other guys, we were like kind of complaining and arguing with John because he wanted to use certain clips that we thought, we were like, dude, no, that clip is lame. Like, that sucks. I put my hand down, or I did this weird, or whatever, whatever. The perspective of a 20-some-year-old young man, right? Um, and our egos or whatever is going through our heads at the time. But John saw those certain clips. He's like, I know. He's like, I know you did this other thing you did it way better in this clip, but this clip, the way
Mm-hmm.
you just look, or what, he would always point that out. Like, and at the time I was like, I don't, what is wrong with John, man? Like, this clip sucks. But
Yeah.
in hindsight, you just take a look and you're like, oh yeah, he's so right. Like, we've all seen guys land tricks like a figure skater a million times. You know what I mean? Land their tens, they land
Yeah.
bolts and land perfect. And I call it figure skating, right? It's kind of like doing a figure skating routine and doing everything perfect, right?
Doing your
Um,
compulsories and doing it
right,
correct.
right. And he just had, he knew to, he just had that, he still does. He has that viewpoint of seeing those clips that everyone else would be terrified to put out in their video part. He's like, no, he's like, this is the one, And he was right. He was right.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, huge honor for you to be on there, but like you didn't put anyone on the team. All the people are hyper stylish, or punker. It's an ethos that
I know.
a lot of us still have.
Right.
So yeah, so that was kind of like that's me leaving Ohio, and I never. So '88 when I left Ohio, I mean I come back to see my mother once in a while, but
Yeah, you left
I
when
was
I
really,
started.
yeah, I was pleased out of that, and I was just like, skateboarding, and then I went to graduate school and stuff like that, and pursued all that kind of stuff. But um, between '83 and then '88, things were just it was a big deal. Like skateboarding was a big deal in Cleveland. Hardcore is a huge deal. So many bands came through, um, and it felt really energized. And more skaters. I heard you and Brett talking about it, but talking about the Coventry crew. You got Charlie Garriga and all those
Hmm.
guys, and they're like, oh wow, that guy can, he's got crazy board control, and but Charlie's one of those guys that no matter what he does, I think he's probably amazing at.
Yeah.
Um, he had gotten a hold of this. I had the original Chromex demo tape that I got from Bleecker Bob's in
Oh
New
my
York when I was
God.
visiting. Yeah, and Bleecker Bob. Well, there's a little cardboard stand of Bleecker Bob's, and it was Chromex demo tape. I never heard of him. I was like, how's this? He just gives me this look like he's like, just buy it. And so, but anyway, I came back and Charlie got a hold of that, and he was just learning guitar. Probably had a guitar a week before or something. And then I went back a week later. He's like, "Yeah, Garth, check this out." He could play the entire tape, like no perfect, the
Oh
entire
man.
thing. And we're just like, "Oh, dude," you know. But I think he's just that guy, and all those guys, Mark Konopka, all those guys, that were ultimately an Outface and part of that crew. They were great, Frank. And they were always out street skating. They were that part of that transition, I think, coming out of the literally as the ollie emerged as foundational. Some
Yeah.
of us got left behind,
Yeah.
but those guys pushed it, way forward. And we're also inspirational. Obviously, I'm much more focused on transition because that's kind of the world and or bonelesses in the street. But it was those guys that really were starting to do more of the tech stuff and just good board control and more of that sort of take on skateboarding.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that, and I am of the generation when I started. It was you needed to learn how to ollie fast. It was bonelesses, jump ramps. You need to learn how to ollie, and then the no comply was coming up quick behind, and people were getting like cavemaning on the handrails,
Yeah,
right? So I remember um, the first time I realized this was in the early to mid '90s when I started becoming friends with some of the older guys in Cleveland, and real like I'm just naive, like I'm excited to meet new friends and whatever, and I'm starting to realize like some of these older guys they can't ollie. I'm like, what do you mean you can't? What do you mean you can't ollie? But I mean, going down the road, I've realized there's a lot of guys that I grew up like loving in the magazines and videos, and but they're of an older generation that they didn't learn how to ollie. That wasn't their thing. Just
yeah.
as I'm sure there's stuff going on right now that I'm like, yeah, sorry, kid. Like I don't do that.
It
I'm
was a big
gonna.
shift. It was a struggle for me for sure. I mean, we could ollie maybe little mini ledges, but really nothing fancy. And I think that I was in this contest in Canton in '86 or '87. It was in a roller rink, a bunch of quarter pipes and stuff put up, and gap things. And I was like, I could do bonelesses really well, 360s, the tweak kind, all that kind of like boneless variation.
Yeah,
And then Mark Heinzman was there, who could ollie. Um, and I ended up winning that contest. And I remember Mark Heinzman was furious, and so were his friends, because I couldn't do that tech thing. I could never have, you know, done an ollie, a ramp coming up to a picnic table and ollie over the whole thing. No way. I could
yeah,
certainly boneless 360 over the entire thing.
yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, like for sure, that was a much more difficult kind of skating. But that was kind of like, to me, it was like clearly that's obviously that's where stuff was happening.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was not a last hurrah, but that was certainly like, that's the end of, boneless guys versus ollie guys,
It
basically.
was moving fast back then too, right? Like
Yeah.
when you think about the windows of time, everything, it's a trip. Like I talk to a lot of my friends now, they're all, late 40s, early 50s, and everyone's kind of going through this transition in their head with their age and their skating. And I always try to remind everybody, I'm like, do you guys realize like we are only a, a year or two removed from the first people on the planet Earth to really like street skate as we know it? And I'm not talking about like the guys that were just hitting parking blocks outside of the skate park. I'm talking about like, I'm not going to claim whoever was the first, but like, let's just talk about like, say like whether it's Mark Gonzalez or Natus Copus, like the guys like that were really starting to approach street skating the way we knew it. Like we're not, even though those guys are like older than us, like we're not, like we started in the infancy. There wasn't a lot of textbooks to look back on, right? Like a kid now has got decades worth of a
Yeah.
library to look back on, right? So yeah, it moved really, really fast. So it wouldn't be uncommon for someone like me to run into someone that's a little bit older and they're like, yeah, I don't know how to ollie. But at the same time, they would say to me like, why can't you do a frontside grind on a vert ramp? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that was
Yeah.
their time. Their generation was like, no, man, like we skate ramps that are like 8 feet and taller, or bowls or pools or whatever, and you need to learn how to frontside grind.
Remember
But
when
in
people
Garfield
started doing
Heights in
wall ride?
1988, that just wasn't
Yeah.
happening.
Like, not just a quarter pipe wall ride, like a wall ride.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think it was in Transworld, it was the goofiest caption. I'm sure it was Natus, the sequence of him riding onto a wall and coming off. And it was like the 90-degree barrier has been broken, because
Yeah.
like, what the heck is going on? Like, yeah, it was nuts. But
Yeah.
it's so weird. Like, even in 81, this guy, Jeff Stroop, had a friend, some old hippie skater dude. And he would come in the garage in the winter sometimes with his old, like Bane board or something like that. And he would try to do wall rides, just
Wow.
skateboard. He had road riders on. And, of course, we're like, what are you doing? You're just chipping away your nose. You're not doing anything on the cinder block wall. But he would get up on there, but, just never actually figured out the shoulder twist and
Yeah.
stuff you'd need to bring it in. Yeah, but when all that stuff started to happen, I think that was, that was crazy. And I think, like, from a hardcore standpoint in Cleveland as well, things really shifted. I don't know if the JFA show was really the trigger, but the JFA show certainly brought together tons of people, and you realize you are part of something. And I mean, I love the Guns and Positive Violence, and there's this band, the Idiot Humans. Like there are these just so good bands that are out there. And I skated with Dave Aracco early on, but he wasn't like total skateboarder. He was this amazing drummer in this most amazing band ever. But then the new crew of kind of bands started coming along, and we started this band. So it was me and Jim Sleeth, who's the roller skater guy that had a ramp in Novelty.
Mm-hmm.
This guy Rich Marco, who skated as well. This other guy, Corky, not too much of a skater, and then Alex Struhall had been in kind of that, let's call him first generation of Cleveland hardcore bands. And, at that point, I'm not like a virulent straight edge guy, but I was, straight edge. We're not part of like a punk rocker scene.
Yeah.
We're like kids that are skateboarding and doing stuff. And so that band and then all these other bands just start coming, like Groin and then, of course, later on, Hyper as Hell and all these other bands just kept coming. But that was a little bit of a groundswell change in what hardcore looked like from, not that I didn't have a leather jacket, but, leather jacket wearing dudes to us. And I wouldn't say this is like some big claim to fame, but I do think our band, Civilian Terrorists, had the first skateboard song in Cleveland. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It's called.
Just claim it, man. Claim it.
Well, after you hear the lyrics, you may not want to. So yeah, it was Alternative Energy. This is like from this little demo tape we did. let's see, like the first one is so you're bored with everything around, trying to be in the right crowd. Something somewhere has to change. This scene sucks. It's also lame. You need something. You need a release, alternative energy. That's okay. Second, grab your board and hit the street. Ollie curb grind. Hey, that's neat. You found what you're looking for. A board of trucks and wheels of four.
Sick. That's neat.
It is neat. It's neat, keen. But who would come to our shows? Kids.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, older guys would still be around and I come to shows and stuff, but 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids are coming to see the 18-year-olds band play,
Yeah, yeah.
And there were shows by we started in 84, by 85, Alternative Press was actually started in Cleveland.
Yeah.
That. And they had a couple benefit shows, and to show how big it had gotten at that point, those shows were like 800 people.
Wow.
And it was that was not typical. Shows were still typically, 100, 150 people, but
yeah,
big shows like that, all local bands, no out of town bands, all local bands playing. And it was like, what the heck? This is Cleveland. How do you have this many people even coming to these kind of shows?
Right.
So it was pretty rad, and I think, Outface was sort of coming if they were the first generation, let's say us and some others were second generation, and then Outface would be third, probably in all those bands that surround that. It just started snowballing at that point. And of course, by the time you get to Integrity and that whole world, Cleveland hardcore was suddenly everywhere. Cleveland hardcore was a big deal around the world to be a part of that.
I have a funny story to tell you about that.
Yeah.
So just with you breaking this down, so I'm really intrigued with time and whatnot, just breaking things down into time. So so far it seems like you and what's his name? Chris, is it Stroop?
Oh, there's Jeff Stroop and Chris Leonard.
Jeff Stroop. Okay, so you guys, I feel like you just said would be first generation. I think
skaters, maybe skate-wise, the linkage, yeah,
right. And I'm just kind of I'm just ballparking things. Then you've got the generation of the next guys that came in after you with Richie Hamilla and Beer Check and everybody. I'm kind of putting that, maybe that's generation 2, right?
Yeah.
Would I be wrong to say that?
Yeah.
Then I would think that the skaters that kind of came in, and I'm lumping music in because back then I just feel like it was all intertwined, right? Then the people that came in of my age range in the late 80s, I came in at 88. I've got friends that maybe came in, 86 or 87, 88. The way you're breaking it down, I'm thinking that maybe we're generation 3, right? So those bands you were saying, that when I started going to shows in 88, it was very False Hope, Outface, Hyper as Hell, all those bands you're talking about. So, and then I started, Integrity came onto the scene and whatever. But to me, I used to go to so many shows. I used to save up my money for mowing lawns to either buy new skateboards or to go to shows. That was it. That's what I saved my money for. So I went to a lot of shows really young, but it wasn't until years later, after I moved to California and the pro thing happens for me, and I start touring around the world. I remember the first time I was asked this, and I've had it brought up to me multiple times. I'll be wherever in the world, but I remember I was in Germany, and the skater came up to me. He's like, "You're from Cleveland, right?" And I go, "Yeah, man." And I'm in Hamburg, Germany. I'm like, how does some German even know about Cleveland, right? I was like, "You're from Cleveland, right?" I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know Integrity?" And I was like, I was like, "Yeah, but how do you know about Integrity?" I had no idea that they were as big as they are or were. I had no clue, because to me, they were just another great, local Cleveland band I've seen a ton of times opening up for somebody. And then over the years of traveling around the world, man, I will always have someone come up to me and bring up integrity to me. It's crazy. It's cool though. I dig it.
It's funny. Like, yeah, that whole Cleveland hardcore thing became a thing. In fact, I was just introduced by a friend of mine I'd met in Sacramento to some other guys out there is like OG Cleveland hardcore. I'm like, is there such a thing? Um, but definitely was not because, to me, by 81, or 82 and saw those first hardcore shows, I was like, oh, I missed out on everything. Like, there was already a compilation album that was about to come out. There were compilation tapes, and New Hope came out in 83, I think. And it's like, oh my gosh, I missed out. But on the other hand, like, the scene we had was great because it's so small. I talked to guys in LA, going to first shows at the Olympic. Well, that's not a show. That's a concert.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what you gain out of that from a kind of subculture identity standpoint, other than you're going to see good bands. But yeah, so so we were in this band, very much promoted skateboarding, talked about skateboarding.
Said it was pretty neat.
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, you got to have that alternative energy. Integrity might be good and all, but they didn't have that song.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like this was so pure, but I remember at that show, at that 800-person show, and there was two of them. A kid who later went on to be in that third or fourth stage Cleveland hardcore, but people came out and asked for an autograph, and like it was like this weird, like, no, this is not at all what this stuff is about, right? This is truly that old mantra, just go start your own band thing. And so you have to kind of do this little weird education. And I think a large part of this intersection of skateboarding and hardcore and stuff is like, I don't really idolize people. Like, we played with all sorts of amazing bands and stuff, and I'd love their records. And for the most part, yeah, you meet the bands, you're like, okay, they're really nice guys. And, like we played with Corrosion Conformity a bunch of times, and like the super nicest people. But if they've been crappy people, I still will like the band, but I'm not going to idolize someone.
Right.
Like, we played with Gangrene, and they're like total rock stars. They sat in the backstage. We came back after we played our songs, sitting back. Hey man, nice set. How do you know you weren't even out there?
Yeah.
And then we found out that again, being straight edge kid, but also, like, more importantly, do not want to be part of a rocker scene. They're busy trying to buy coke from people. So we found out about that, and so we're long past any legal ramifications at this point. So our drummer took their entire stack of records they were selling on tour. It was they had like a cover of Till Tuesday song or something, one of these novelty things in '85, I guess. And they were sure we took it. We're like, you can take it, man. Like, go on your way, rock star. You do what you want to do. And so after they left town, everyone had that 12-inch in their record collection because we had a lot of them. But like, we're like, the scene means something. There is a certain set of standards and values that need to be a part of it. That stuff's not a part of it in my mind, or at that time, not now either. And certainly not this kind of idolization of people and getting autographs and weird stuff like that. I mean, I met Circle Jerks in '82, and they invited us backstage, and like, so it's not like the Circle Jerks like, oh, this is cool guys, and they're going to tell us about what they've been up to, or whatever. So I think that's super important because it's DIY, because everything is done by yourself. Like you're your own person, you're doing stuff, and you want to be impressed by other people who are doing cool things as well. But you're not just impressed because of their name or whoever. You're like, you kind of have to prove it to us. Like, what are you doing? Like, do something cool. And
yes, exactly.
We got signed to Metal Blade Records, Death Records, which is a subsidiary. We were pretty much broken up by then. And Chris Andrews is the one that got us on Metal Blade for sure. We showed up on a compilation record, and like, I was sure it was Corrosion Conformity helped us, but they're like, no, we didn't know, but it's cool. But like that point, like, we were on it, but we're like, yeah, I think you get to this point, at a certain point, you love things so much you almost hate it. I think by like 85, at a certain point, it's like, I mean, this, I love hardcore. I still love hardcore. I still go to hardcore shows. At that point, it's just like, I hate it though. At the same time, I hate this 800 person show. I hate this like weird dynamic that's happening with some bands and stuff. Like, I don't,
Yeah.
you know, I'd rather sit in a room and practice as a band versus
Yeah.
actually having to go to a show and deal with all that nonsense. You know,
Yeah.
it's more fun to make music than actually do it. So, yeah, in retrospect, it would have been fun to kind of see how that played out. But
I feel like I
you
can
know,
relate to that statement in more ways than
yeah.
one.
Well, you know, it's nice. You get on Metal Blade and you know you're going to be on a compilation, and then this thing arrives in the mail. You're just like,
Wow.
oh my god, does it have to be a skull? Does it have to be like?
There you go. Wow.
It's just,
That's intense.
it's so lame, and it's just like. I was just talking to Jim Sleeth, our old singer, and I was like, oh, what a, you know, it's just so lame looking. He's like, yeah, he's got it on his wall, but he's got this side up, the band's on it, not the other side. Which I
Hey,
think is the way to go.
but you know what? But you know what? Maybe 13-year-old me, if came across that in 1988 in a record store, just might have had a sale, man. I might have been like, whoa, that looks so sick.
We even had little stickers that we were just like, not jaded, we were just like kind of over some of the standard stuff of hardcore and punk. Like it said, like, fucking skulls, mocking it. You know,
Yeah.
like we didn't have, it's like, you don't need skulls. You know, it's, yeah, that's, so yeah, when that thing showed up, it's like, oh, yeah, that's nothing to be, that's not going to go up on the wall, that's for sure. um, uh, and so, yeah, like that Cleveland hardcore scene is just a powerful scene, man. I saw Integrity. I think the first show was '88. He had Dwight had engineer gloves on. That was the era of engineer gloves and duct
Oh,
tape
yeah.
and that nonsense. One Live Crew, you know, they turned out kind of on a bad angle, but Confront and all
One
those
Life Crew.
guys.
I don't know. I don't know the story of that with One Life Crew.
I don't want to speak too out of turn, but they became, and this is not, you know, 2024 America where it's just as bad, but you know, very much anti-immigration,
Oh,
anti-foreign people, and
oh,
very
okay.
vocal about it.
Oh,
Which is kind of a bummer because it's such a nice name, One Life Crew. You're like, oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
You can never wear that. You know, maybe they took the Stormtroopers of Death album actually as reality versus a joke, a big parody album, you know,
Right.
because all that it's funny
But
titles. They're funny if you're in on the joke, not funny if you actually believe it. That, you know,
right. What about do you remember Die Hard?
I know that name, but I mean, I know it's an Integrity song. I didn't ever knew. Is that a spin-off of some of
Was
those
it?
guys?
I
Or
don't know. I mean, I was so young during that era, so I was kind of just, I'm in Garfield Heights trying to pick up the pieces where I can and take the RTA bus downtown to see bands. But Die Hard was a band. I think I first saw them play 1989. There was a big show at the Berea Rolling Bowl, June 3rd, 1989. It was my brother's birthday, and I went to the Rolling Bowl instead and skated all day and slam danced or whatever. They just had local bands play all day long.
Hmm.
Die Hard was one of them,
Hmm.
and I have one of their records. And I picked it up recently, and I was just reading like the notes on the back, and their one of the photo credits just says photo credit Tina. And I know this one Tina. She lives in LA now, but she knows a lot of I think she's older than me. I don't know, but she's a photographer I always know her as being a photographer, and she's from Cleveland. She knows a lot of the same like older people that I
Hmm.
do. But she lives in LA now, and I just texted her. I texted her a picture, and I was just like, "Is this you?" Like, it just says Tina, and she was like, "Oh my god!" She's like, I don't know, but I think I was the only Tina around in like 1988 shooting photos of hardcore bands. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
anyways, they're just another one that I remember. Face Value
sure.
was
Yeah,
huge at that point,
yeah.
but
Um, I think, like to me, the Guns were probably my absolute favorite Cleveland
yeah.
hardcore band, and they turned in. That is False Hope with Spike singing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
With Dave Araka and Scooter, you know, guitar. I think Dave, did he move to bass or something for that iteration of the band? And I had this other guy, Scott, that's playing guitar, and then Spike. Yeah. I mean, the Guns kind of like when Metallica Ride the Lightning came out, it was, everyone wanted to be able to do that stuff.
Yeah.
And so they kind of incorporated hardcore. I wouldn't say crossover, but they definitely built in some of that. And they were really good musicians who could kind of pull it off for sure.
Do you know John Patosh?
Know the name. Again,
Okay.
he would have been a little bit younger. Yeah.
He'd be younger than you, but he's a guy that I knew him a bit more in the 90s. Him and some guys I knew opened a record store called Riot 101. And this was at a time when, the whole punk thing and all that was just super dead, and it was turning into Blink 182 and Green Day and all that stuff on like a popular level. And these guys really like took it back to a very cool, like, bass level. I really appreciated that record store. But we're social media friends, so I see him popping up all the time on my social media feeds. But I've just come to realize, like, he's been around, seems like maybe mid 80s, but he just seems to be like a wealth of knowledge of Cleveland punk, Cleveland hardcore. I mean, he just seems to, like, he's always making posts about, like, he was at this show and that show, and he's got, this record and that record. And I was even thinking about this podcast that I'm trying to do with, like, the history of skateboarding in Cleveland. And I was like, man, Patosh, like, from what I see on Facebook, I'm like, he needs to start his own thing. And you guys should probably get together and talk sometime, because it just seems like he'd be like, I think Turner said, like, Patosh did come from skateboarding and music like we did, but I think he dove more down the music road, and just seems to, I think you two would really probably hit it off. You guys could start a show together, man.
Yeah, from seeing the Dicks and Cause for Alarm, like one of my favorite shows, to seeing Deke Kreutzen, and the PA went out at JB's Down, and Dan Kubinski, the singer, just sang without a mic, and you could still hear him, with this blasting music. Just, Deke Kreutzen was an early 80s a Wisconsin band. Amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I know Deke Kreutzen.
Yeah, really. And then, well, it's so funny because when that second Deke Kreutzen album came out, which was a bit more, it was not hardcore, but we loved that thing as a band. Like, we were like, we want to be like that. We don't want to be hardcore anymore. We want to be like Deke Kreutzen's second record. It was so good. So yeah, like, my deal is, so I was in the band, by 85, that contract thing came through. We were pretty much broken up at the end of 85 or so. Continued to skate. I was finishing up school. And still going to shows and all that good stuff. And then, like we talked about, in 88, I had that, it's like, how am I going to pass up this opportunity to move to Huntington Beach, and I'm going to go to grad school eventually, but, like, why not spend a couple of years out here? And, I'm not going to get sponsored or anything, but I want to skateboard for a couple more years, intensely. And, that's what happened. And it was a very dead scene, honestly, in Huntington. It was just, there wasn't a ton of skates. There weren't a lot of people. The, backyard pool scene existed. Pomona, the San Juan Capistrano Bowl, often called the Alva Bowl. Yeah. Which is a perfect thing to do figure eights in. Nude Bowl, of course. AIDS Bowl in Long Beach. And in fact, my wife surprised me a couple of years ago, and it asked around with some of my friends, like, what would be a good pool for Lance Mountain to make for Garth, his coffee table. So he made the AIDS pool for me. Oh, cool. And it was a huge surprise, but yeah, it's nuts, the craftsmanship on that. But so that was a super, like, early 80s was super important to me. I think Huntington Beach was very important, not only the connection back to Cleveland, but just kind of, let's do the skateboarding thing nonstop, like, barely work, just skateboard. And it was fun, super fun. And now still skateboard, the tricks have plummeted. Skate backyard pools, like, mainly skate backyard pools and bowls, have old man sessions at parks in the bowls. And I think as much as anything for backyard pools, it's everything's overblown. We talk about subculture. It's so hard to have subculture these days. I mean,
Oh
everything is
yeah.
everywhere. I think we actually have, and it's not really, but backyard riding has its own deal, right? You got to search them
Yeah.
out, you got to drag them, you got to find them, and then you got to protect them. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, and it has a little bit of that feel. And all you got to try to do is a frontside grind in a backyard pool, and it's a good day,
Right.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's where I'm at, and I'm
Yeah.
totally happy doing that. So I don't know. I was going to see if there's anything else I missed here that I wanted to mention. I think for me, that's the gist of it. Very instrumental people in Cleveland, of course, and so stoked you're doing this because the history of Cleveland hardcore is not that well known, honestly, at
No.
all.
Right.
Exact
I mean,
same reason.
you've named bands to me that I've never heard of, and I was a kid that went to a lot of shows in the late 80s and early 90s and mid 90s. I went to a lot of shows, and there were some
Yeah,
bands that you rattled off. I'm like, I don't even know.
I would definitely check out the New Hope compilation. Or the New
Okay.
Hope, yeah, maybe it's just called the New Hope. I think it's on Apple. It's got those first generation Akron, Cleveland hardcore bands.
Yeah.
Really, really good stuff, and some Art Damage bands, really good. And there was a documentary done by Brad Warner, who was the bass player of Zero Defects, and he went on to move to Japan, become a Zen master,
Oh
literally.
wow. Wow.
Also worked on Godzilla movies, and it's a really good one. But it definitely truncates. I'd say by '82, basically by the time
Oh
Zero Defects ended. So it's got the South Euclid show in it. There's two shows there. The really infamous Riot with Negative Approach, and then there was a later one done that sort of started maybe like Integrity era-ish. It's just not very well done, unfortunately. So
hmm.
I think it's just this thing that we're stuck with in Cleveland. Is even when things are trying to do it, it doesn't come out as good as it should.
Maybe we need
And
to
so I
get
think,
John Paytosh on this. He might be the guy that could put stuff together well.
yeah, I think the lineage is really cool. And like I said, like I still think the Guns to me are one of the best hardcore bands ever. And
Yeah.
just an amazing group of guys. The songs are amazing, and so there's a lot to be proud of from the old Cleveland,
Yeah.
Northeast Ohio.
For sure. I got a question for you, and I think you're a great person to that could probably give us some answers. So there's a I think any skater of my age is very familiar with this term, and I don't know if we were the age we were the skaters that coined this term, but I think your perspective might be very interesting because I think you predate these people. Can you can you can you explain the phenomenon of the Cleveland GG?
What, I don't even know what that
The
is. What
the
is
G I
the
thought we
Cleveland?
talked about this before. The GG. That was the
Oh, the
gener
GG Allen thing, or
the skaters. We used to call them the GGs, and they were a lot of all these guys that ended up becoming our friends, right? Like maybe little Richie was in there, or all these.
oh yeah,
They were the older guys. Again, these guys all became my friends. But when we were kids, they were the guys that were older than us, but they were younger than you, and they were the guys that were showing up with Ricky Barnes boards, uh, jean vests with their independent patches on the back, or drinking Pabst Blue Ribbon. Because
100%. Yeah.
this little phenomenon, the GG, the Cleveland GG, I swear I still see the influence from them over all these decades. There's something that they put into the subculture of skateboarding in Cleveland that I swear, man, it's a unique thing to Cleveland. I don't see like in Des Moines, Iowa. You know what I mean? Can you give us
You
some insight into that? Your perspective.
Now I know. Yeah, now I know. Um, yeah, and when I lived in Huntington Beach, Gigi was a thing, right? Lorman and Ricky and all of us, like Gigi Allen. In fact, I think Mike and Ricky drove up to the San Francisco Gigi Allen show, and they're in that documentary. You can see him in the audience,
Oh wow.
probably Gigi or whatever. Um, So yeah, so that whole punker thing, right? The jean vest, a little bit of the nihilism, shitty jail tattoos. That whole thing became part of it. And part of it was also embedded in, I think, again, the whole style of Huntington Beach. I think I
Hmm.
told you a story that, you know, Ricky Barnes is, again, one of those guys, natural talent, beautiful style, everything. It's just like, it looks so great. Always has his arm up like this as he's,
Yeah.
grinding
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
I still try to do that. But I was telling him a little bit ago that, I always admired that style. And I remember, I was a Huntington Beach guy, right? I moved from Cleveland to Huntington Beach. So I came back and was skating this like mini ramp in Cleveland. I'm this skinny guy with actually no real style, but I'm busy throwing my arm up like this,
Oh
just like
yeah. Yeah.
toothpick arm and, absolutely no style. It just looks ridiculous. But, I
Some
thought that
some of
was,
us call that the Cleveland elbow.
well, so that's a good name for it, this thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll send you pictures later. I've got pretty much all my like grind pictures. I really try to do that
Oh, I've
still.
done it a million times, man.
But the other is skate bat. Skate bat's the other one. So you drop in, your arms are out like this,
Mm.
and you're kind of almost riding, kind of like almost square shoulder with your arms out like this. So skate bat. Now there are people out here that do skate bat as well, but definitely that's a Cleveland thing. You'll see guys, dropping in, their arms are up, man. It's like skate bat, flapping their wings. And I think like there are guys that are just naturally talented and have this beautiful style. Rich Hamilla,
Yeah.
Ricky and Norman, I think are like epitomes of that kind of stuff. And you can't just copy that. Like you're never gonna, it's never gonna look right if you try to copy it. So
Yeah.
you can try to do this skate bat thing, and you can wear the punker costume, but you're not those guys. And this does not make me Ricky Barnes.
Oh, but we want to feel like it, man. Well,
Oh,
what's funny is I as a kid when I started branching out and meeting other skaters and seeing other skaters, I saw that. I picked up on that. The Cleveland elbow, I see these guys, you know, and I didn't know where that came from. I thought it was their thing. I don't know. But and these guys were pretty like, they seemed like tough guys. I mean, and turns out they're all like really nice people. Um, but anyways, it wasn't until I got older and moved to California, the whole skateboard thing happened for me, and then I ended up learning more, seeing more, and becoming friends with these people. That's when I started realizing, like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, these guys were just their kids, essentially, right? They're probably just kids, and they were stoked on people like Ricky and wanted to emulate that style, brought it back to Cleveland. We didn't know. And so we called it the Cleveland elbow. The other one that I always notice is I always maybe think that it picked it up from is also Dwayne Peters. As Dwayne Peters has that,
yeah.
you know what I
Yep.
mean? So
Totally.
it wasn't until, geez, man, so many years later, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. That's maybe where it came from. But
Yeah, think of that. There's that famous picture of Dwayne kind of riding down a road, his
yeah,
arms out like this. Um, but even Slappy's, for Slappy's, the arm should really be up. It really needs to be on by Slappy. I mean, ability to pull it off stylistically or not's a whole different question. But you really do need that arm up there for a Slappy. It has to. What else are you gonna do with the arms? I think the other thing is, like my friends out here will constantly make fun of me because if I'm not cognizant of it, when I come up for a grind, my backhand does this thing and it kind of like almost twists backwards like this, like and it's flailing above my head. So really, in order to control that, I try to keep the arm here because it forces it from not doing this crazy like twist in the background there.
right.
So it's a good thing to do. Uh, yeah, so that's a good one. Yeah, punker vest, the Cleveland elbow,
So
skate
you
bat.
so you think that all is the roots of that come from Huntington Beach?
I mean, I would think so. I mean, again, it's just one person's take, but you know,
That's a
if you
valid
think
take.
about
I
this
mean,
guy,
you predate almost anyone I've ever talked to in the Cleveland
well,
skateboarding world.
the
You know what I
hundreds of
mean?
each guys may say something different, but
Yeah,
I think Mike and Ricky, we all loved Dwayne at that point and
yeah,
his style. Now those guys could pull it off, take elements of that, but it's still the deal, right? And so if you live out there, I remember Ricky telling me when I was leaving Huntington, he's such a good guy. He's like, yeah, I wasn't 100% sure of you when you came out here, and you're kind of this weird style, and it's like, but yeah, you come along, you come along. So maybe after 2 years of, throwing the elbow up or, getting a little smoother at tricks, it finally clicked a little bit. But yeah, I mean, style matters. My sons both skateboard, and they certainly didn't get it from me, but they've got great style, skateboarding, and
yeah.
you know,
It's interesting because it took me a long time to really understand that because, well, I think when I started skateboarding, like style definitely, we were attracted to a certain style, right? And also style means something different to everybody, right? And um, also sometimes style is you're only picking up what you even see in a photograph. Because I have certainly skated with people
mm,
that I grew up watching in skateboard videos or have seen them in magazines, and they're people that people hold on a pedestal to having this amazing style, and then I skate with them in real life. I'm like, this doesn't really look like it was captured how it was captured on camera, right?
yeah,
Whatever,
yeah,
whatever. It, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. But it was I was the generation of by the time we were all getting really good, I call it started turning into like this. I kind of relate it to figure skating, right? Like video
mm,
parts where like you land bolts and you don't touch the ground and you have to land everything like you just have done it a million times, right? It's like
yeah,
someone putting on a figure skating routine, right? Like, ta-da, I did a 10, And it wasn't until I got been so submersed in that for so many years and actually kind of maybe subconsciously feeling that pressure that I needed to skate like that when I started realizing I'm like, oh my God, like I think this is what all the old guys were talking about way back then about style. Like when I'd hear the old guys complain about like, okay, you guys can do this, this, and this, but you look disgusting doing it.
mm,
I started realizing that, or just seeing that in myself of like, okay, I could do this trick, but I've watched myself do this so many times and I'm like, God, I don't even look good. Like I look gross. I mean, I literally stopped doing a lot of tricks. I could do a lot more than I do. I stopped doing it because I feel in my mind that I just look disgusting. And I'm just like, I just don't want to do it. Now that's just me. I don't care what anybody else looks like. And in fact, I one thing I've noticed about myself is from living in California for so many years, coming back to Cleveland and skating with all my old buddies that I grew up skating with.
mm,
Um, I absolutely love. That's the first thing I picked up on is how their bodies move when they skate. I'm like, oh my God, I miss this. I haven't really skated with this buddy of mine in over 10 years, and I fully I can see it. It's like we're 13 again. I'm like, I miss his style, and that's his style. It might not be the style of Nadas Kappas, it might not be the style of Dwayne Peters, but it everybody has their own style that's their own, right? At my age, and I'm just an old guy, right? We're not talking about someone getting a photo in a magazine or whatever, but I really realize how appreciative I am of it's just so fortunate if you can have friends that have been around that long and they still skate and you can see the way their body moves when they skate. I think is really cool.
yeah. It never changes. Everyone like
Yeah.
said makes fun of the claw hand I do if I'm not cognizant, but I've got pictures back from 1980 and 81, and the claw is there, even if I'm riding in the street. It's so. I think, yeah, for me, I think style really became you have your own style, but I think it was just like getting so confident that you're going to do stuff that there's no hesitation. To
Yeah.
me, that's a really good part of style is just because then you're really getting aggressive into the trick. Then you can lay into it. you know, and I think when you're at that point in your skating, you know, whatever the style is, whether someone likes it or not, at least you're totally with your board, and you're totally, everything you do, you know, you're going to make, and it's going to be as hard as you can make it.
Yeah.
You know, versus now it's like, whew, I survived it. I made it. I survived it.
That's my career.
Yeah.
That was my whole career. Okay. I didn't even have to go to the emergency room today. All right. I hope my sponsors like this. How long
Yeah.
can I keep this up for?
That's the biggest difference, I think, versus like younger, you do it and you're like all revved up and you're going to do 20 more. I'm like, that's so cool. I did it. Now it's like, okay, I survived it. You're going to do some more. All good.
Yeah.
Like, that's good for today. You're like, I'm done.
Yeah.
It definitely fades, you know, and I've been injured a bunch, and, you know, it just gets in your head when you're an old guy. You're just thinking about way too many things when you're skating versus just skating.
Hey, I got one more question for you. So we're talking about the phenomenon of the GG. We could possibly track that back to Huntington Beach, mid 80s. But do you think, and possibly that goes back to those guys in Huntington Beach, maybe looking at the influence of Dwayne Peters, right? Maybe.
I think that certain style. I mean, look, the jean vest, the whole punker thing. You know,
Yeah.
the
And
arm.
there was definite, like, there was an attitude to it as well. Like, a lot of younger skaters, it's hard for them to understand this, but I give the example of me going to the Berea Rolling Bowl when I was 14, and the Berea Rolling Bowl was kind of like an epicenter for a lot of those guys. And I, you know, probably was wearing my Powell Peralta t-shirt. I had my pink Per Wellender skateboard. And I remember the one time I left my board up on the deck of the ramp to go get a soda or something,
Oh, no.
only to come to find out my board got whipped across, like whipped across the park. And all I see is a bunch of dudes riding Ricky Barnes boards, you know, jean vests and chain wallets and independent patches on it, you know, the whole thing. And I'm just like, oh my God, like you know what I mean? There wasn't a real big feeling of camaraderie coming from those guys at that time, you know. It was like,
I think,
hey kid, you better learn to go frontside or you're out of here.
yeah, totally right.
Stop with the backside kick turns. If you don't frontside grind right now, we're breaking your board and you're out of here.
I moved for a summer from Cleveland in 85 or 86 to work at my uncle's mortgage banking company. And it was good. I skated this big half pipe up there and got better. But when I came back, those guys in 86 had basically decided, and I think this is kind of coming out of Rich again and some of these real style guys, just stop the skating the way we'd been doing it. You know, it's almost the equivalent of like DC's Revolution Summer musically. This felt like Revolution Summer for Cleveland skateboarding. And that was when it was just like, no, like, do not grab early, ever. You either, you know, and you grab it late and you tuck knee.
Yeah.
If you do a rock and roll, you slam those wheels down. It should reverberate. When you do a grind, you better be in it, back pocket. You know, I think I wasn't there when it happened, but as soon as I came back, I know everyone was like, come skate with us, because everyone wanted to kind of almost like show like where things had jumped up, and it was different, you know, and that's a whole attitude and style thing is like, and it was just like a you know, like a real decision. I think everyone made, just like, no more. Like, it's not like it's not going to be tolerated. It's just like, we don't want to do that anymore. Like, we want to try to do stuff the right way.
Yeah.
You know? And those guys did. And, you know, all these guys that are after me, you know, those are honestly, to me, those are the real skaters. Because those are the guys that they really did blast big airs. They didn't do a 3-foot frontside air. You know, they did big airs.
Yeah.
They really did skate punk rock and stuff. You know, like I said, I was never a good skater, but I pushed myself really hard and I could do stuff, but I would never have done a 6-foot air, ever.
Yeah.
I could do a 3-foot air, but never. I could never go that high.
But I mean, you're that's the generation, you know what I mean? It always evolves, right? You know what I mean? It's always this evolution going on, and some of us, it's hard to kind of, once it evolves, it's hard to kind of just change and jump into what the younger generation's doing, you know?
So yeah, so I thought that was really cool what those guys did, you know. And look, that's late. That's 85 or 6, you know. But obviously, great stuff has already been happening to skateboarding for 5, 6 years before that, and in
Yeah.
that kind of style.
Yeah.
But like, when it happened, and you know, so you have people like Jim Hill and those guys. Those guys are blasters, you know.
Yeah.
Those guys
I
really.
got an interesting story to tie into all of this is speaking of Dwayne Peters. So some years ago, I did like a 5 week US tour. It was myself, Dwayne Peters, Bill Danforth, Mike Vallely, and I squeezed in a new like up and coming skater that I was sponsoring at the time, and he was out of Cleveland. His name's Cyril Jackson, and he
Hmm.
went on to be. He left my company to be pro. He turned pro for Baker skateboards,
Oh,
and
okay. Oh, I know that.
he rode pro for Baker for quite, I don't know, a good amount of years. He hasn't ridden for him in a long time, but um, I'm still friends with them. I keep in touch with them. I mean, he's in his early 30s now. In my opinion, he may be probably one of the, I think probably one of the best, like gifted, talented skateboarders to
Hmm.
ever come out of Cleveland. He was Cleveland slash Bakersfield, California. Um,
Hmm.
but anyways, so I call him CJ, CJ, Cyril, whatever you want to call him. He was just like a young kid at the time. He was, I don't know, a teenager, and this tour was happening, and it was supposed to be like these multi-generational tour. Like, so you've got Dwayne Peters, then you've got the Danforth, Valley, and then me, and then I talked into getting CJ on this tour. I was like, we got to get CJ on here. This kid's just,
Hmm.
he's young, he's so good. So the coolest thing about this trip, well, not, it was super cool that we were all on this trip together and everybody was all good, in good headspace for 5 weeks together on this trip. And so the one day we had a day off and we were on a tour bus, and the tour bus was parked behind some building like in, I don't know, Indiana or something. And everyone looks around and we're like, Dwayne would always be the first one up, but Dwayne would always be like hanging out. When you'd wake up, he'd be hanging out. And we were like, where's Dwayne? Like, where is he? And so we looked out the bus window and it was a loading dock a few buildings down. And Dwayne is down at the loading dock at like 7 a.m. trying to do a boneless. And so I get out and I go up to him and I'm like, dude, what's going on, man? What are you doing? He's like, Sweet Jack, man, you got to teach me how to do a boneless. And basically what he told me, he was at being on this trip with us for all these weeks.
Hmm.
He was so stoked to
Hmm.
see all these different kinds of skating, right? We were doing demos
Yeah,
every single
the
day.
whole range.
Every
Yeah.
day he's seeing everything from Danforth doing his thing to me to Mike to CJ, this kid doing
Hmm.
crazy stuff, right? And he was like, I'm just sick of this. I'm sick of being the old man that blah 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 blah. Like he was going on this whole rant or whatever. Basically, what he told me, he was like, I missed the boneless. He's like, I'm
Hmm.
of the generation like we didn't boneless. I predate. He's like, I predate the boneless. And I've never heard this out of another skateboarder's mouth before, because the boneless to me is like, that's ancient, right? But Dwayne is telling me, he's just like, I predate the boneless. I've never learned the boneless. I grew up
Yeah.
skating pools. But he was so motivated. He was like, enough of this. I'm tired of being like, I'm so stoked watching you guys. I'm never going to be doing like 360 kickflips over the pyramid, but I
Yeah.
want to boneless the pyramid. And it was super cool, man. It was just such a cool moment. I'm like, wow. So me and maybe CJ came out or Mike or something. We sat there all morning long teaching Dwayne Peters how to do a boneless. But um, number one, it was just kind of mind blowing to me. Like, wow, oh my god, like somebody predates a boneless. I mean, now I realize like I actually have a lot of friends that were pros in the '70s.
Hmm.
And yeah, man, like now I've learned like, oh my gosh, like yeah, slalom was a thing, and that was a big thing, right? And that,
Big. Yeah.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
something that's like way lost, on skateboarding now.
Well, we're fortunate actually here in Northern California because Judy Oyama, who's been slalom skater Santa Cruz for years. She's like 62 or something.
Yeah.
And she's actually been training with some younger people in the area and some older people in slalom. And Judy was just in Italy for World Cup of slalom skating and stuff. And, to your point, it's just another aspect of skating. And the way it was explained to me by some people is, when you have rubber bushings on a truck, it's quick, but there's a slight delay, right?
Yeah.
On slalom boards, there's none, absolutely none. So just the slightest movement and you're turning.
Yeah.
And it says it's kind of, crazy because it is so fast and so quick. So, it still exists and it's cool to see. And it's cool to see people doing it. But yeah, I agree. Because think about 70 skater who could do grinds and maybe a frontside air, and then Jerry Valdez comes along and does an invert.
Yeah.
Well, not everyone made it past that cut. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And then we all know the story by the 80s, the more tech skating came in, and, Dwayne will go on ad nauseum about Tony Hawk and those tricks he did and stuff. But
Right.
that was another like inflection point. I learned boneless ones at Skateboard Paradise in Elyria.
Oh,
I'd seen
wow.
the picture in Skate Fate, and
Yeah.
I was a Ohio guy. And there's that pyramid. It was all, flooded most of the park, but there's that one part down below. It had a pyramid, like 3 or 4 feet high, and that's where I forced myself to throw my foot back on in the air versus just jump up. I still do a bonus once in a while.
Yeah.
It hurts my back, but I can
It
do it
does.
once in a while. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
too jarring.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the kids, the guys that could adapt in various phases were, not only way open-minded, but also just flexible enough to do that. Just like the guys that started skating switch.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I remember reading an interview with Ben Schroeder.
Yeah.
He get laid up in Europe somewhere, bad injury. And the interview was something like, so when he started skating again, he's like, well, I don't know how to skate switch. So I've been skating for 6 months, 9 months. I'm going to start skating switch.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example of what I was talking about, me and style. I when switch really became popular in 92, I had a pretty big bag of switch tricks. And then I realized not only do I look disgusting doing this, I feel disgusting. You know what I mean? I just was not. So I rarely skate switch, but it's a thing. Now it's funny. I'll have a young friend call me out when I go to push. What do they call it now? Now you have to know how to push switch, but I push what is it? It's switch Mongo or something like that.
Probably.
But it's I don't know. I guess I'm 49, so I guess that's how it rolls. I don't know, but it's all good. So did you used to slalom?
No, but I've always been intrigued with it, and I thought about it, but they train in Sacramento and Santa Cruz and stuff.
Okay, yeah.
But just to learn the technique of it is super intriguing. Maybe not the tight slalom, because you end up doing that with your arms, but the wider slalom, it just looks fun.
For me, it was always a thing that maybe we'd goof around as we were kids or something. But I went over to Dave Hackett's house one day, and he starts. I see this board sitting there in his garage, and it's got some weird block thing up by the front bolts, kind of. I'm like, what is that, man? Right. It's like, oh, it's my slalom board. I'm like, your slalom board, and he opened me up to. I don't slalom, but it's so fascinating listening to him talk about slalom in detail and the weight and the groove and blah blah blah. I don't even know, but I'm like, oh my god, this is a whole another avenue that's really neat about skateboarding, and I think fun. Not that I do it, but I'm sure it's super fun to do, and you can get wrecked doing that, but it's a totally lost. It's almost like a lost art,
high.
Yeah,
you're rolling in on a rolling is 12 feet high, and then you're going through these cones, and I wouldn't even know visually where to cue my eyes. Are you looking to the left of the cone? Are you looking beyond? I don't even know how you do any of that stuff. But yeah, I think it's pretty neat that people are out there doing it. It's still appreciated. Maybe freestyle will have its comeback.
Maybe, man.
There's a bunch of Japanese kids, and Moonshine Skateboards has a bunch of freestyle decks. They do. So there's that. It's happening, I guess, out there.
It is happening. I got some friends. Killian Martin, he was a pro for Powell Peralta. He would come over to my house in Oceanside and skate my mini ramp with me. And it was cool, man. You should look him up. He's a freestyler guy, but he makes some really cool videos. Really outside of the box thinker with skateboarding. Like he was trying to drop in on, like I had this mini ramp in my backyard in Oceanside it was 3.5 feet high with 4.5 foot transitions with pull coping that stuck out super far.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was trying to drop in on.
The transitions in the ramp looked like Helbo. Helbo,
Yeah.
Was a ramp in Orange County.
Yeah. I've heard about that.
It was just like,
yeah. My ramp was super gnarly. Well, Killian, freestyle guy, comes over to skate my mini ramp, and he was trying to drop in on my ramp in a handstand. Like he would put the tail of his board up on the coping, like he's going to drop in, but then throw himself into a handstand and try to drop in. Like he was trying it, man. I was like, that's pretty gnarly, man. So, but anyways, it's fun skating with him because we would skate my mini ramp or we would skate my little ledge out front, and his perspective, like he's a freestyler, but he would normally skate like a regular kind of popsicle shape type board and street skate. And, I don't know, it was cool because he would bring like a whole nother perspective into what we were doing in the session. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like that.
Like I think you guys in street, like certainly knew how to kind of take a trick and then augment it. And I think that even happened, by early 80s for sure in Cleveland. Like once we learned some of those basics, like boneless, for example, well, geez, then you could do all these variations of the boneless. You can do it on banks, you can do it downstairs, you could do the bone up on ledges. So, there were like endless number of variations that we would just goof around and do. And, do some sort of version of the bone up on that bank behind Record Rev, bank to wall thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all those spots out there, and I don't even know how many. So you said that one at Record Rev is still there?
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah. If any young skateboarders or younger skaters are out here, are on here listening to this, the bank to ledge we're talking about is the one that's right off of Coventry behind the apartment buildings, the little bank with the double-sided ledge. That's it. Yeah, it's still there, man. Young skaters today, they still skate that spot.
Yeah, I thought about that fairly recently because one of these things, like not many cameras back then, but I'd love to have a video of me going up on there for rock and roll and coming back in, or whatever. So we skated we skated all the loading dock banks, skated PR banks, and I know you've already talked about that in other podcasts.
Yeah, skaters not PR.
Yeah, I was always scared to go there. I went there probably twice, but I'd heard about those guys had gone. Pool balls were thrown at them, literal pool balls.
Oh yeah, it was gnarly. We had knives pulled out on us there, and this was like early I mean, even in the mid '90s. The mid '90s going to PR banks was, man, you went at like 7 or 8 in the morning and you got out
really
quick. Yeah, you had to go early before the locals woke up.
Yeah. Some of the spots were bad news. I think to some degree though, in 82-ish, like we were out and about in Cleveland. We didn't know any better. We were everywhere.
Yeah.
Good. We didn't know what a bad area was. We were just little kids skateboarding. And
right.
I think, you're so like skinny and little. I don't think people generally pick on you. Those doing that.
Yeah, I even think in like 95, 96, one of my buddies had a gun pulled on him at PR banks, middle of the afternoon. Now the PR banks are gone, and the city built like a concrete, like little ramp and a flat bar there. Like now you can go there and kids will probably talk to you about the Tony Hawk video game or something like that. It's just so bizarre, man. Like times have changed so much. It's crazy.
Yeah. I was trying to find this one picture. I think you and I were talking about this, like this is, I think this would be, if I can find the picture, this is like the epitome of Cleveland with Jeff Stroop, probably around 82. There's abandoned steel mills everywhere. Youngstown, Cleveland, because dying industry. And this is, again, not thinking, but we climbed up on one of these abandoned steel mills on the roof because the roof would be cantilevered. So you have like a bank and then it would be maybe slightly downhill, but then you have it over here. Kind of without thinking that stuff is probably just basic sheet metal and if it's rusted at all, you're just going to plunge down into how many feet. But we climb up on there. We'd ride around on that stuff, because you see pictures similar to that in the magazines, but probably much more safe and stable. And yeah, but like that would be a that would be a good representation of maybe early '80s Cleveland skateboarding, like climbing up on a steel mill roof
Yeah.
and skating around on that, because that's everything, right?
Yeah.
That's Ohio, Northeast Ohio.
Oh, for sure, man. Man, that's awesome. Um, well, shoot, man. Looks like we've done almost 2 hours and 20 minutes. Should we wrap this thing up?
Yeah,
You got
yeah,
any
I
more
think
you want to
that's.
put out there?
No, I think I honestly just want to thank you again. It's been awesome, to get to meet you during this process, but also just for doing it. Like I said, I don't think musically there's been good documentation of what's gone on in Cleveland in those early days, and certainly not in skateboarding. And skateboarding is even more ephemeral.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a lot of pictures from those days,
Right.
no videos.
Yeah. Yeah.
To hear the stories, I've listened to everything you put out, and it's like, I didn't know all those stories, and it's amazing to hear them.
Yeah.
And like even with Brett, I thought it was interesting. Like by the time he was skating, he kind of had his crew within a portion of Cleveland.
Right. Yeah.
And I think like going back to these '82 era, it was not that. It was scrambling to find anyone anywhere. So someone way out in Elyria and someone in Brecksville.
Yeah.
And someone in Warren, like all meeting. So
right.
like it's super, super cool to hear how, those little scenes developed. And as we all know, those little scenes all have their own different styles. They all have their different takes on things. And they have their names. Everyone's got their own, skate group name. We had Skate Dicks was ours. Was an early one because it's kind of a good story because it was done in Kent originally, and my friend Chris Leonard and this other guy, they were punker or hardcore girls, women, and they always sat at this one table in the cafeteria, but they had like dyed hair. They were like punker, not skate. And so they made up this like fake fanzine, like, oh, I dyed my hair purple today. I'm going to change the world, and just left it on their table. So when they came to sit down at their traditional table, there it was for them. Like we became all friends, of course. But the comment was, you're two tables over watching it, and they're skimming through it, and then the look, and then you hear, oh, that's just the Skate Dicks.
That's awesome.
So yeah, like that went on. That was pretty big in Cleveland, Skate Dicks. We spelled it Dicx because there was a stadium at Kent State called Dicks with an X in it. There was Team Toast. That was a big deal in Cleveland. We had that in there were two versions of that. When Murphy's Law played and we played with them, they had this roadie named Toast, and he would come up between songs and do this kind of crazy version of skanking, but it was nuts. So like, of course we were all like, what's this? So Toast became like, this chant. We would say that from stage, Team Toast, and all the skaters would do it. So, I think it's so interesting because all of these little groups have their names for their skate crews. And John just put out, we had the stickers, and I think he's got a board, the La Mirada Rad Cats.
Yeah, the Rad Cats.
It's just his version of it. And I just love that stuff, right? Because it's 10 people carving out their little thing. Like, yeah,
we were Team Insanity down on the southeast side.
Team Insanity?
Yeah. Yep.
We even made little business cards because there was a period in like '86 where the skaters would hand out business cards. I don't know. It was just like a thing that happened for a while. So we thought, it would just have our name and number and on it, but just to be like extra goofy, like to take it to the next level of goofiness.
Hey, we had a Team Insanity car. A car.
Oh,
yeah. We all had nicknames. And the team and Demo, his name was John, but his name on Team Insanity was Demo. He had a big old brown car from like the late 70s or I don't know, early 80s, and it was all just spray painted graffiti like Santa Cruz and this and that, and Team Insanity was just spray painted across it, and you just like pull it into the parking lot, park, and then we would just all do bonelesses off of it. Like that was our skate spot, was a Team Insanity car.
Sounds pretty insane.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was insane.
Yeah. We made stickers, and of course, everywhere we go, go down to Mount Trashmore or something. So there were skate dick stickers all over the place, and
Oh, it's so good.
handing them out as if you're somebody,
Yeah,
to the kids.
yeah,
Like, yeah, you want some stickers? Here you go.
so good.
Uh,
Oh man.
yeah. Well, thank you again, and yeah, I just look forward to hearing more of them and more of
Yeah,
the stories and all that good stuff.
yeah. Well, thanks for being on here, man. It's super cool. Really, really cool to get your perspective. I mean, like I said, you're probably the first person I have found that like takes Cleveland, skateboarding in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio back this far. You know what I mean? Because I've never been able to get past like the generation before me. So it's really cool, and it's also really cool to hear yourself and everybody else I've been having on here so far just uh, throwing out the names, man. These names of the people that were back then. They were doing this or they were doing that. We didn't have cameras to capture it, but I'm glad we're at least, getting these names out here now,
I think how serendipitous some of this stuff is. If that I hadn't been at that arcade playing Donkey Kong, and he hadn't spotted my Vans shoes, I went and met Jeff Stroop, who was,
Yeah.
enough to go and search out crazy band names for shows.
Yeah.
And run into Vince Rancid, who was super welcoming, and was like, skateboarders, at a hardcore show,
Yeah.
which was not like, if none of that stuff had clicked, then, who knows,
Yeah,
what
totally.
I'd be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, is anything else you want to say or anything like that?
No, just
All right.
keeping on.
All right. Well, I will end it there and say thank you for being on here. And I wrote up a little outro. I'm trying to
Oh,
see
okay.
if I can start reading this after every show. So Garth, thanks for
I'll listen
being,
attentively.
Garth, thanks for being on this. And to everyone else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. You can follow Cleveland Skateboarding on Instagram at Cleveland Skateboarding. Listen to the show on Spotify. Watch the show on YouTube. Pick up t-shirts, long sleeves, and sweatshirts at clevelandskateboarding.com. And there are also links to everything I mentioned before there as well. You can also follow me personally on Instagram, Facebook, or at christiansfeedback.com and YouTube. Thanks again, and stay posted for the next episode coming hopefully sooner than later. And remember, be cool to one another. Everyone deals with pain, loss, hard times, and heartache. Skateboarding eases that for us. So keep that old school skateboarder spirit alive and support one another. That's it. And goodbye. And see everyone next time.